You just heard Eternal Frost from Winter's Eternal Frost demo, which would later become an EP, amongst other things. This is the Rec Mail Podcast. I'm Mark.
And I'm Jason. And welcome to our winter Göden episode. That's how it's pronounced.
Yes, heard it from the horse's mouth.
Yeah, we know now. And yeah, this is a part of our Doom series, obviously, and kind of a different tone from what you heard the last episode with Solitude Aeternus, which is more of the epic, I don't want to say uplifting, but definitely a little brighter at times, more in the sort of traditional heavy metal sort of camp. And,
for sure.
Winter is definitely coming out of a completely different place, and we'll be hearing quite often, very soon, from one of the main progenitors of the band, which is Stephen Flam. Sorry.
Flam.
Yeah. I have a friend that has a last name Flame, Flaim. And so every time I see Flam, it's my go-to. But yeah, he was nice enough. Mark and I actually just finished the interview with him. We haven't cut it up and edited it yet, but it'll be sprinkled all throughout this episode for look for those probably going and coming from each kind of talk set and things like that. Really fantastic insight into the making of this album, the demos, the band's history, what the New York scene was kind of like at the time, and then kind of getting into the in-between years. This is one of the weirdest. I can't think of too many bands with like a second act so late in the game like this, with a 30-year gap like this.
Where there was nothing really happening in between either.
Yeah, I mean, he was involved in a couple acts that he'll talk a little bit about, but
there was a 15-year gap of nothing.
Yeah,
like radio
where he put his
silence
instruments down and things like that. So, it's just a really, really cool, incredible story, and we're rooting for these, for Göden to sort of do some really amazing stuff. And if you haven't checked out the Beyond Darkness record that we'll be playing at the end of this episode, go out and do yourself a favor and pick that up, especially from a visual standpoint. You just picked up the vinyl copy.
Yeah, beautiful Svart. Again, they seem to be
the
one. They've done, they did that Penance Parallel Corners reissue, and they have a really great aesthetic, and they seem to like to not take chances, but they believe in the people they sign, and kind of like really push the envelope with presentation. And
the stuff they did for the Ulver book, the stuff they did for the Death SS book, like all the stuff that they've been putting out, them and Cult Never Dies are kind of just doing some really
they just put out that Sentence book
niche
too.
Stuff. Yeah. Svart put that out, or did CultVer Dies?
No, Svart put out.
Was
the
that Svart?
Book.
Okay.
Yeah, I bought it directly from them
because Cult put out the finished death metal. I think in my brain, I kind of associate
you might be able
to
to buy it from their store or something, but I pre-ordered it because I never thought in a million years there'd be a Sentenced.
Yeah, no shit. No shit. Well, it seems like Decibel seems to be reissuing a lot of that stuff in America.
Yeah, and actually, in their store they have the Death SS book now in the Decibel store.
Yeah,
but you can also get it through the Agia Offensive as well. That's the one who put that out actually.
Gotcha. Got it. But yeah, so we've been doing this Doom series, and I guess what we're trying to do, and it's kind of an interesting day for our non-patrons. We are going to be recording a Patreon show today, and it couldn't be like the furthest extremes of the sort of whole Doom series, because we're doing a Fu Manchu in Search of show to show the kind of the brighter side of American quote-unquote Doom. You call it Doom rock, you call it stoner rock, stoner metal, there's all kinds of different tags, and we'll definitely get into that. But
they're like they've got like the Blue Cheer,
West.
It's a West
Blue
Coast
Cheer,
vibe
Hawkwind,
that we really haven't. There's been no other representation of that kind of like more, like not that everything else is negative, but it's upbeat.
Yeah,
it's fun. It's like what you ride your BMX or skateboards to, or something.
It's the sort of stoner Days of Confused side of the like stoner Doom kind of side of things, Yeah,
it's like the less esoteric desert rock.
Yep. And we had already done Caius and Monster Magnet episodes in our early years of Requiem, so those weren't really up for being in the American Doom aesthetic. And so I thought, Fu Manchu's like a band that doesn't get talked about a lot, and it's kind of near and dear and fun and an easy kind of cool thing to do. But Winter's on the other extreme of that, because, in a lot of ways they've been kind of given credit, as you sort of heard there on Eternal Frost, the demo version, and we'll be hearing the Into Darkness version as a comparison piece a little bit later in the episode. But, they're coming at one of the, the slowest, just most like really apocalyptic doom kind of things going on. And in a lot of ways, Winter is one of the bands that gets kind of mentioned most frequently, I think, with inventing the sort of death doom genre in a sort of way. I think they precede
them and Dream Death are kind of the...
Although Dream Death, I would say, had more of a foot in thrash. You know what I mean? Like, they might have been doing the Celtic Frost, but this combines just these utterly miserable vocals on top of everything else, Yeah. And so to me, it's a little bit different. Like, Dream Death might have created some of the guitar riff for that, but they really doubled
as far
down.
As whoever throws out credit, usually Dream Death gets a fair amount of credit for
sure
for that. I think because they're more accessible to the average listener as well. This is more of
this is almost more in Asphyx Autopsy, sort of that level of muddy misery.
Like pre-funeral, pre-Thurgoffen kind of.
Yeah.
Actually, they're about contemporaries with Thurgoffen.
Well, I think this probably, here's the direct.
Was that 88?
No, Thurgoffen's later. Disembowelment actually beats them.
Okay.
So I think 94 is that Streams Thurgoffen record.
Is that late?
I think so. It's 93, 94.
Okay.
And I think 92 is when the Disembowelment sort of comes out. I think I have it here. I've got Disembowelment is 93, Transcendence into the Peripheral. And then I'm trying to think when Thurgothen's 94, Avant-Garde. Yeah.
Yep.
So like I said, I think Winter is that band that kind of is the progenitor of, Funeral Doom and a lot of the sort of more, death doom kind of stuff. I mean, I found a quote from Fenrez where he sort of said, I don't think that the dogmatic doom appeared until the first Winter album. And I kind of get what he was sort of saying there, because, the bands that we covered that had roots in the 80s, such as St. Vitus or Dream Death, they had a lot of variety to their music. It was kind of, every song was maybe a little bit different. I mean, Dream Death had the Celtic Frost riff at its heart. Yeah. But even Solitude Aeturnus, which is kind of coming out of the Candlemass camp a little bit, had a lot of variety to what they were doing. But Winter is a singular aesthetic in a certain sense, and a sound that's very much, cultivated.
Just like Celtic Frost.
Yeah.
I mean, they're in the same camp as far as the whole thing's about atmosphere.
Yes.
Lyrically is much different than what was going on in any kind of extreme stuff at the time. Some thrash might have kind of borderlined a little bit, but they're much more artful than, a lot of the bands we've been discussing.
And Steven will get into that later on when he sort of talks about what he was trying to intend, especially with Into Darkness, where he kind of saw the dream through,
Yeah.
The reason we open with the sort of demo version, which is, some people refer to it as the Hour of Doom demo. It's just the Winter demo. Nuclear Blast will later release it in 1994 and call it the Eternal Frost demo. So however you want to kind of grab it. It's usually nowadays most Into Darknesses feature the EP attached to it.
Yeah, the version I got, the double LP, has the whole presentation.
Even the Metal Mind reissue that came out 10, 11 years ago had both on it. And so
it's just kind of the full discography.
Yeah.
It's a punk discography.
They created, they have one EP and one full-length album. So that's it.
Just like Repulsion.
Yep, exactly. And so you look at them as kind of a singular piece, but Eternal Frost essentially are a lot of the songs that will get kind of polished on Into Darkness. And so, basically they're hailing from New York proper, Brooklyn kind of area. The name is definitely Long Island as well. Yep. Was Steven from Brooklyn or no?
I think he might have been from there, but I think they lived in Long Island.
They sort of lived in Long Island. Yeah.
Or at least that's what I think the Metal Archives
does. It say that?
He mentioned Long Island in the interview as well.
So then you got John Allman on bass and vocals there. And then, Steven will actually kind of clarify the sort of drumming issue, because if you go on Metal Archives, it can be a little bit confusing and in some of the liner notes. But essentially, Joe Goncalves is the guy who wrote all of the drum parts. I believe he plays on the demo, but when you get to Into Darkness in the studio, it's another guy who, he didn't even give me the last name, a guy named Frank someone is the guy who actually plays in the studio, but he was essentially a hired gun, and he played exactly the parts that Joe sort of already wrote.
Which kind of makes sense when you sit and listen to the record, because some of the double bass is sloppy.
Yeah.
And just weird, like slightly off time at points too. Some of it sounds like it's out of like just saying like, well, fuck, this sucks. Like I've got to play this guy's shit.
And
it's hard to play double bass like that slow. It's just like
I have a term for it later. I'll come up with it. I have like a funny term. I can't remember what I called it. So I'm trying to look through my notes, but anyways, yeah, for the style of like double bass, I think I called it like molasses blast is what I called it, because it's like it's blasting, but it's like trapped in like fucking tar or something like that. But yeah, and then so Frank they did not get along with, and I'll let Steven tell that story a little bit later. And he essentially, like, as soon as he was done in the studio, he like quit on the band. And then that's when they bring in Scott Lewis, who I believe is credited for some stuff on Metal Archives, if you go there and look. And Scott Lewis, people know from the early Brutal Truth stuff. And he was in Exit 13 as well.
Yeah, I would say he was my favorite grind drummer at the time, because however they were recording, I don't know where the first Brutal Truth stuff was recorded, but he would blast so fast that it would almost kind of like decay into you couldn't even fucking hear it anymore.
It was almost like ambient noise or something.
Like it was like the microphone couldn't even pick it up anymore.
Yeah. And
seeing them live with him, it was right before Rich Hoke joined. Mm-hmm. And it was a pretty incredible sight to see, because his kit looked like a piece of shit. It was like Will from Keelhaul.
Yeah.
Just playing a piece of crap kit, but just like a master of it too. Is a fun.
Yeah, it's like economical or something like that.
Yeah. It didn't matter as long as he had something there, he could perform.
Sure. Yeah. Scott played a few shows with them live, and then that was pretty much it. And I think they were starting to maybe write some future Winter songs, and then it just kind of like fell kaput a little bit. So Scott may be on some like unreleased Winter demo somewhere. Yeah. But essentially Scott never is actually on a recording, according to like what Steven said, even though he's given credit for
he might be on like some demo stuff that he has in his house.
Like I said, something that was sort of unreleased. But Joe wrote most of the lyrics, and they'll talk about the lyric sort of process of that as well. So, Joe wasn't just the drummer, but also kind of the lyricist and stuff. And yeah, they put out this first demo in '89, and it gets them signed to Future Shock. And Steven will talk a little bit more about kind of what happened with Future Shock, but essentially things don't go that well. They're given a lot of freedom. They get along with Future Shock, but some financial pitfalls sort of happen. And then really where most people, I think, get a hold of Winter is when Nuclear Blast puts it out 2 years later.
That's where I first came across it.
Yep. In the Terrorizer Doom issue, which I picked up, they said this New York trio offered a raw, feral blend of guttural brutality, resulting in one truly bludgeoning game changer. Death Doom is born.
Who was that from?
Terrorizer's Doom issue.
Okay.
Yeah. So, forged out of the fires, I said, of the New York punk scene, where everyone was playing fast. They were counterweight. They were slow, heavy grinding. They definitely are leaning more on, and we'll get to a couple of their influences here in this next little set of music that we're going to play. But a band that seems now, it's really funny that we sort of brought these guys up for the Neurosis show when we did that, the 4-parter on Through Silver and Blood, and now they just sort of seem to make an appearance in multiple episodes, with Ian Glasper. And so like Amebix has continued to play like a really significant role, you know?
Yeah, Amebix and Discharge, I think, might be two of the most, influential punk-ish bands to metal, for sure. I mean, Voivod's big into Amebix as well. I mean, Amebix was just bizarre. Like
and heavy.
Yeah, they were heavy. You could penetrate them easier than, like, at least for me, for like some of the little bit later on Crass stuff I didn't really know what to make of as a teenager.
Yeah.
But Amebix always like at least sounded like the drums were enough for me to like at least glom onto that and not really know what the guitars or vocals are doing, but at least I had the rhythmic aspect of it.
Yeah.
And really the track we're going to be playing, Winter, is very much the kind of blueprint that Neurosis and Winter picked up, and like, we can do a whole album like this.
And I believe the Winter 7-inch is like the first or second Amebix release. Like it's like,
they put it out on the No Sanctuary.
Yeah, it shows up
reissue
on
that I've got,
but it's like predates like any like actual albums and stuff, which we talk a lot about with Ian in our 2-part Anarcho-Punk episode. That It was mostly singles and 7-inches that were kind of like floating that scene up. It was
like rockabilly and stuff back. Like, it wasn't about albums, it was about singles.
Yeah, it was like 1950s culture.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's 1967 is the first year in rock and roll history that albums outsold singles. So it took from like the birth of rock and roll in the early 50s
25 years
to really like
20 years.
Yeah, the Summer of Love, like when people were buying Sgt. Pepper and Are You Experience and taking the whole thing home and like doing drugs and it was about the sequence of the songs. It wasn't about the song, you know, and stuff like that.
The album instead of just the hit.
So Celtic Frost, Hellhammer is going to be a big one, and in fact, we'll get into them in a moment as well as Amebix in a second. But they were wearing a lot of different kind of bands on their kind of sleeves a little. And they actually, in the 2011 liner notes, because I have a Metal Mind reissue, they kind of talk about it. It says, tuned lower than any band, their tempos crawled at a snail's pace, establishing their unique direction. Inspired by the diversity of Sabbath, King Crimson, Hawkwind, Celtic Frost, Sacrilege UK, Carnivore, Amebix, and Discharge. The combo of dark lyrics and vocals and crushing slow time signatures gradually garnered them a loyal following of punks and metal aficionados, and even some New York hardcore crossover types who gravitated toward the heavier bands like Sheer Terror and Breakdown. And that was from, I think those liner notes were written from Ron Grimaldi, who will come up in some of Steven's interviews, because Ron's kind of the guy who kind of got the ball rolling with them reforming, at least to play some shows and stuff like that. Put him in touch with Southern Lord Records and things. The nice
thing about that Svart reissue, I don't think the Southern Lord stuff's probably out of print by now, but the Svart thing just came out last year or whatever, or maybe this year. Actually has all the different liner notes.
Yeah, it's got the 2011 and the 2020.
Yeah,
which is cool.
Nice.
And I think the Metal Mind one that I have is even different from the Southern Lord one. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
So there's some other kind of things kind of happen in there a little bit. But yeah, there's a great quote, speaking of Southern Lord. This is a quote, I think when they were like trying to sell I think it was either from the liner notes or I think I caught it in one of the ads I saw on like Decibel that when it was reissuing it. And it said, sometimes a band is so far ahead of its times or just so original that people aren't ready for them. And only years later do they get the praise they deserve. This is the case for Winter.
I would agree.
Yeah. And Steven talks a lot about this in some of the interview clips where, as far as he knew, like no one really cared about them. And when he kind of got out of metal, and it wasn't until like decades later that like he was even aware that people gave a shit about what was sort of going on with them.
Yeah, really the whole Roadburn thing that he goes into, like that was the moment. It was like, oh shit, okay.
Yep. And apparently I did a little bit of research, and this didn't really come up in the interviews much, but I think he does kind of mention it a little, like where they were coming from different bands, but I think they were in Doomsday and Meltdown were a couple of the bands that I think John and Steven came from, and I'm not sure if Joe was part of either of those as well, but basically then the trio sort of comes together in '88, records a demo a year later, and off to the races. But it's relatively it's short, in terms of the band history. There's not a lot to sort of get into. But let's kind of, before we sort of set up the EP and Into Darkness a little bit, let's talk about their influences here. And we want to play just a kind of a mini set, if you will, just to sort of give people a taste for, the first time you might hear Eternal Frost. And Mark will kind of share some of his thoughts maybe in the next talk set about the first time he heard this and kind of what him and Chris's impressions were and, things like that. But I think in order to wrap your head around these guys, for people who maybe aren't as into this kind of post-apocalyptic style of doom, it might turn some people off, is just to sort of lay a little bit of historical foundation. And I think, we mentioned Amebix and the Winter 7-inch, and I think we also have to mention Hellhammer. And, Apocalyptic Raids and the Winter 7-inch both come out in 1983. And, Hellhammer is so important to the aesthetic of a lot of things. Obviously, most of you know that they become Celtic Frost, essentially. The roots of them sort of grow
the creative
out of that.
force of it.
Yeah, exactly. But, like I just said, the song Triumph of Death, which is kind of the epic doomy song on Apocalyptic Raids. Most of the other songs are a little bit more faster. People might know Massacre is pretty iconic.
Yeah.
Emperor does a pretty killer cover of that. That was the first time I had ever heard it. But you could almost say that the true nucleus of the winter sound and aesthetic comes from songs like Triumph of Death. This grinding, noisy, sludgy death dooms. It's got these otherworldly shrieks, I said, from realms of dark existence, which is not unlike some of John's vocals. They're very, kind of different and stuff. And I've talked about that riff in Triumph of Death that, when Grindcore Coon and I put a band together, we accidentally were writing Triumph of Death riffs.
I think
we just didn't know it.
That's why Celtic Frost, I think, is so, because, over the years is even shown like there might be one of the most important bands ever for extreme music. That they came up with the riffs that everybody had in their head, but they couldn't get out.
Yeah.
Like everybody has that riff. They're like, yeah, that's like, it just makes you feel like a great metal riff.
Yep.
And it's there, but they were the first ones to actually, oh shit, they did it. And then Napalm grabbed on, and 35, 40 years later, we still have bands influenced by Celtic Frost, and they're still putting out great music. It's Triptychon. So it's
weird to think that like Hellhammer, Triumph of Death could have as much influence on Napalm Death as it does Winter, because they're like two totally different, like in terms of speed and velocity, they're almost like opposite camps. But then you kind of go, well, no wonder Lee Dorian could like walk back and forth from those worlds. Yeah. Right. Because there is something that is a connective tissue between them.
Well, I think, one of the big things too, why people across genre got into them is that Hellhammer did exactly what they wanted to. It was a complete artistic expression of what they wanted to do. They weren't encumbered by anybody else.
Yeah.
They were ridiculed by a lot of people that thought they were just a joke.
Yeah.
And then, the joke's on them if, longevity and sticking to your guns are really a kind of a big deal for them.
Well, one thing that's interesting that I wasn't maybe completely aware of is that Tom doesn't even he had a hard time kind of getting back in touch with that Hellhammer stuff.
Yeah, it was difficult.
It took him a long time to figure out that he liked it and appreciated it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And they even kind of bring that up in I found when Celtic Frost put out Monotheist back in 2006, 2007, somewhere around that realm. Maybe earlier. I can't remember. But
I think it was earlier, but I don't remember, to be honest.
What is this issue?
It wasn't what I wanted at the time, so I didn't pay attention to it until years later.
2006, I think it was. Yeah. But yeah, they do a call and response kind of thing in Terrorizer. And one of the first things they pull out is a song from Triumph of Death demo.
Yeah.
And he's just like, he kind of embraces it. He goes, let's fucking just keep headbanging to this, So it's cool. He's kind of come around on it, but it took him a while,
Well, he even put out, it's probably about 5 or 6 years ago now. It was an unreleased 7-inch that he put out through Century Media.
Yeah.
Of Hellhammer. I forget what the hell it's called. But I got it, and it was like 2 demo versions of some other song that was never released. And, I think
he's at a stage in his life where he can kind of see the vision, the forest.
He's had this consistent artistic vision his entire life. And I think when he listens to himself and his inner creative force and goes along with it, he has good intentions and always has good stuff comes out of it. But then when he does, like an Apollyon Sun or, Cherry Orchards or something like where he's pushing the boundaries he's pushing the boundaries in the wrong way. Because Into the Pandemonium, they're pushing the boundaries in the way that makes sense for their artistic kind of vision. But, when we go to, I can't think of the fucking name of the record, Cold Lake.
Yeah.
When we get to Cold Lake, it's just okay, it seems like producers pushing this way. I remember reading in his first autobiography that he was like, it didn't work because he was happy. In a relationship and stuff too, which
needs to be miserable.
I get that to some degree, but that's also kind of something you think about when you're young.
Yeah,
when you get older, you're like, it's a different thing. But if you really stick to your guns, and it's what you love to hear that you do, like what you love to make, eventually it's going to find an audience.
Sure,
that's the only way I ever found an audience with my art as well. Is nobody gives a shit about cartoony, goofy shit in heavy metal. And then eventually they did because I kept doing it and people knew that I loved it. And you've got it's not the easy road, but it's the it's the artistically satisfying road. You're not going to be rich off it, but you're doing something you enjoy doing, and other people see that.
I also probably think he thinks of that stuff as like, the same way I think of like my early reviews and like the first couple Eclipse issues.
Yeah.
Like, they're rough. They're hard for me to read because it's personal, and I know how much better I became as a writer. So it's hard for me to even appreciate where I started. And I think it's like we're hardest on ourselves.
Well, of course.
I think that's kind of how he's coming at it.
Music's a weird thing too, though, because there's no other. I guess like music and filmmaking are the two ones I can think of where people still care about your old shit. Like nobody comes up to you and said, "Oh man, that review you did in Eclipse number whatever was it like changed my life." Like no, but people are screaming they want to hear Massacre at a show, and they're like, "We're doing something else now." Or like nobody comes up to me and like, "Hey, why don't you go back to the Guardians comic you did in high school?" It's like, no, nobody gives a shit. That was terrible. Like it's garbage. But
that was funny.
So like, but music has a life outside of that keeps going more so than like any kind of like the written form or like comics or art in general. People don't. It's an interesting little time capsule to go back and see how somebody got to where they were.
Yeah.
But you don't usually go back and revisit that, and that's like, oh, that was really where they were just amazing, and shooting on all cylinders.
It's funny you bring up that because I actually had a weird kind of somebody reached out to me that had was a huge Dawn fan, the Swedish Black Death kind of band, and they loved our Slaughter Sun episode that we did years ago, and they're actually reissuing all that stuff on vinyl and on CD, all the Dawn stuff, which is pretty exciting.
Fuck, I'm trying to think of the label now.
Yeah, I can't think offhand.
They redid like Sentence Shadows of the Past, European label. Great. They put out great shit. I can't think what the hell they're called.
Yeah.
But you can just look it up online.
I have to look it up. But the guy goes, "Hey, you mentioned like writing a Dawn review for Slaughter Sun and Eclipse." He goes, "Do you have that?" And I was like, yeah. And so like I took a picture of it and sent it to him, and I said, "Be kind. Like I don't really." I was like 18 or 19 years old. I was still trying to figure out what I want to be as a writer. Like I can stand by my stuff from like Eclipse 3 forward. Like I really grew between issue 1 and 2 and issue 3 in terms of like finding my voice a little bit. But he wrote back, he's like, "Great review, blah, blah." So I was like, whew, all right.
That's the big...
Could have stabbed me with it. He could have really called me out.
I think people that would go that far to ask about it.
Yeah, he was into it.
They're going to be into it anyways. Like I did some work with Fred Espy from Dismember recently, and I was telling him about the something we did, me and Chris did in the original Requiem zine back in the 90s of like there's a show review and then an interview did with I think it was 93 did with Maddie Karki at the
Blondies?
Marquee. No, this was at the Marquee. It used to be called Todd's, which was a gay bar during the week, and then the weekends they'd have death metal shows. But I scanned it all in and sent it to him.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, this is, he was like, oh, this just brought back a lot of great memories. It's like, I told him like off the bat, like the writing's not great, but we were really enthusiastic. And like the stories I still remember about I got a press photo from Nuclear Blast. It was it might be I think it's on the vinyl, because they did a bunch of different photos for that where they're like,
the black and white one? Oh, okay.
But there's one where they're like standing it looks like they're in a gravel pit or something. And I took that into a graphics class. I had a printing class, and this was probably 92. They had one of the first like scanner computer setups, and I put that press photo in there, and it took 45 minutes to scan it the DPI was not much.
Sure.
Maybe 300.
Yeah.
But I still remember how long that took. I had to come back like the next period to get my like looped discs or whatever out of the damn thing. But it was nice to be able to show that to somebody in the band, and they get a kick out of it.
Sure. That's funny. That reminds me on a completely separate tangent. Mark and I were recently on a little vacation with fellow frequent guest and old Requiem Eclipse mastermind, Chris Dick. And we were up north of Traverse City, and we were in the hotel room just like hanging out, and we were watching, I exposed Mark for the first time to Impractical Jokers, which is just a ridiculous, dumb show, but it's like something you can kind of binge in the background. I think you were in the shower, but it was the guy, it's where they have to like take a product and like sell it to people. And
I saw a little bit, yeah.
I don't know if you saw the one where he had the 112K modem. Yeah. And he's just like,
but it's all like taped together.
Exactly. And he's like, if you'd like to download a picture of like Elizabeth Hurley and get it in 35 minutes, like the people he's trying to sell it to are like, what the fuck is going, like, it's like a real product. Like,
yeah.
And these people are just like, what's fucking happening right now? He's like, yeah, you could look up press release for Pierce Brosnan being the new James Bond. And like, he's just making all these 1995 jokes. It's really funny. So you talking about like old stuff scanning in and stuff is reminding me of that. So yeah, so we're gonna get into this a little bit. One thing I want to say about the Winter song from Amebix, I did write a couple notes. It's kind of things to look for in this song that you'll hear in Winter and that you heard in the show opener, the Eternal Frost demo. I just said it's sludgy, incessant. It's got like this lead bass throughout that just sort of screams this sort of winter, and as they're screaming winter repetitively, as if to sort of drive home this doomy, apocalyptic kind of nihilism and darkness. I said the howls of winter right up into the end sound like someone's last dying choking moments, and a lot of early Killing Joke in this as well.
Absolutely.
So, you can kind of hear
Hawkwind.
that. Yeah.
The spacey elements of Hawkwind, like 90% of it, Sepultura, Fudge Tunnel, Neurosis, all those bands pulled stuff out of that as well.
For sure.
But that whole, especially Neurosis, like the more, I hate the term tribal drumming because it's not really accurate, but where you're basically just using the toms, you're not using cymbals or the snare very much. Mm-hmm. Like that kind of like propulsive drumming that's happening is something that would go on into Winter, into Neurosis, into a lot of the, like
a lot of Funeral Doom uses it too to sort of create that sort of like uncomfortable aesthetic, that you're in something.
And like Winter would do that with where they would use that, but then instead of just doing a cymbal hit, they do a cymbal hit and a snare at the same time, which just kind of like enforces, especially when it's that just dead slow shit where it's just doom. Like that would really kind of like move it forward, not where it's not just like, just doesn't seem like slow, but it was like slow with intention.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So let's get into it. We're going to hear just a pair of tunes here just to sort of set up the aesthetics of where kind of the pool that Winter's kind of drawing from. You'll hear some clips too from Steven, both before and after the music as well, where he'll kind of talk about the early band origins and maybe some of the bands that were influencing them and things like that, and where he got a lot of that influence. He does tell some really cool stories. I'm not sure if we'll hear it here or a little bit later in the episode. Kind of depends on where Mark decides to put it, where he kind of talks about the role that his dad played in kind of, getting him into different types of music and stuff. It was really cool. Mark and I could totally relate based on some of our experiences, especially working at the record store with Mike Johnston, who a lot of you know from the Stooges episode, MC5, Allman Brothers, Peter Green, things like that. So
yeah, Steven said he was very fortunate to have that. Like to be able to have everybody, there's something you can do with your dad for fun, but for that was just like, oh shit, that's
a big one.
Amazing.
And I could talk rock and roll. My dad's a rock and roller, but he kind of like stops at like Black Sabbath, which is fine, but that's about as far as he never really got.
But he wouldn't like pull out hey, let's listen to this Bluish Occult record song. And
no, we'd rock out like Foreigner and things.
It's something though. That's
Jukebox Hero was a big one when I was like 6.
I thought it was a cool song.
Yeah. So let's hear Winter from Amebix and Triumph of Death from Hellhammer, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit more about the demo and set all that up.
started probably, I graduated high school around 1988. And John, the singer bass player for Winter, him and I were close friends in high school. Actually, roommates for probably maybe 10 years too. And we both had our individual groups. He had more of like a punk group that was very much like Discharge. And I had some groups that were a little bit more like thrasher and stuff like that. And, back in that time period, if you were a little different, it was pretty obvious, right? You're talking about 19. So, I went to my school. I was probably the only person with long hair in my whole entire school. And John was the only person, actually him and another friend, the only two people with like waddy style thin mohawks that were like 10 inches to 12 inches tall. So when he moved to my area, I was like, yo, you're kind of different. Let's hang out. We'd also seen each other at CBG. He was like, hey, I know you. And he's like, yeah, I know you too, whatever. And we became friends. And that friendship lasted till today. I still consider John one of my best friends. So we started, he got me kind of into more of like the anarcho punk kind of stuff. Everything from Crass to Amebix to Anti-Sect, Discharge. I mean, the list goes on. He was really into more of that style stuff. Obviously, we grew up we're a little older than you guys, so we also grew up on a lot of Black Sabbath and Zeppelin and King Crimson and all that as well. So I was more into the metal, so I got him into Carnivore and Celtic Frost and Hellhammer and some of those groups. And together, we kind of singed it kind of together. And that was kind of how we started. But New York at that time period, we're talking like mid-'80s through, like, say, mid-'90s, I would say New York was on fire with music at that point in time. There was a lot going on, a lot of great groups, really flourishing scene of New York hardcore. It was basically, I guess that was about it. You know, it was New York was raging at the time. I mean, Cro-Mags, Agnostic Front, all those groups were kicking ass. And then in Brooklyn, you had Carnivore and groups that were happening over there. So that was kind of the scene that I was in. I liked a lot of the more of the punk scene that was in New York at the time. I felt like Winter always fit in with the squatter rot kind of stuff. We played a lot of the squat shows with groups like Nausea and the Radix, Apostates, Disassociate, Ralphie's group. And in the city, when we played in the city, we mostly played those gigs. We felt very comfortable there because it was kind of like our roots a little bit. I was not really into death metal I liked a lot of those, the musically Celtic Frost and all that, but lyrically it did zero for me. I was always more into the more socially aware kind of punk kind of stuff. And that's kind of, oh yeah. And then on Long Island, we played a lot at Sundance, and that was more of like a metal vibe. We opened up for like Sepultura, Death, Carcass, and the list goes on. Played a lot of groups at Sundance too. We got a lot of love out there on Long Island as well. So we kind of floated back and forth between like that punk, like squatter rot kind of punk stuff in the city. And then on Long Island, we played with more of the metal acts. And then, you know, we bounced around to other states, whatever, and played. And that was kind of the start. Amebix are a huge influence. And that first album, big influence. I mean, I like Killing Joke and all those too. You got to realize the time period. There was not that much out at that point. Yeah, we took the name right from Winter, just like we all do, right? We find some element about it, and we name. I named Göden after a Winter song, right? The same way we named Winter after the. So there you have it. Understand though that those anarcho punk groups, like we played with Nausea a lot. I mean, I played with the guys from Nausea after that in a group called Thorn, which was signed to Roadrunner. Who broke up and Winter broke up. We started a group called Thorn together. So I would say that the people that were into that anarcho kind of punk kind of style, it really was not very big in the New York hardcore scene. I mean, people try to make it out that it was bigger than it was, but it was a smaller sect. It was like a sidecar of the New York hardcore at the time. Listen, the Cro-Mags and Agnostic Front and all those early New York, they all listened to Discharge too, by the way. You know, Discharge were like kind of like, they made it not sound so happy anymore. You know, the chord progressions, everything about it was a little bit more aggressive sounding and like minor keys and very chromatic in the way that they chose to write their riffs. So it was breaking away from like the American, you know, circle jerks and Dead Kennedys and all that. I mean, Discharge were raw. If you listen to like Cro-Mags and stuff like that, you listen to the riffs. They're very similar in a lot of ways because I think they took their lessons from Discharge, massively influential. You find me one person that doesn't like Discharge, and that time kid's usually pretty odd. Well, I was always, I'm kind of like a little bit of an inventor, we'll call it. I grew up, my father had a cost stereo and alarm security store in Queens. And I grew up like putting, you know, big subwoofers in cars and stereos. You know, I'm talking about the 80s. Cars didn't come with good stereos then. It's not like now. The car didn't even have an alarm in it. I used to put Benzie boxes and stuff. So I used to bring all my pedal boards and my guitar cabinets there and kind of take them apart and soup them up and do stuff. And, you know, obviously being into Black Sabbath and you listen to like Master Reality and you're like, yo, that's a killer guitar sound, but that's definitely not an E. And, I started experimenting with it. And then I met a really great guitar tech at the time. And I told him what my vision was. And we experimented literally for like about a year and a half, me and John, with string gauges and different things. And, you know, ultimately got it to the sound we wanted, but then realized that we had to play differently because the, you know, instruments are not like, you couldn't just go out and buy an instrument that was a baritone already or whatever, or a 7-string or an 8-string guitar. It just didn't exist. You were playing on standard scale instruments at the time. So you had to be creative and really think it out. And the tuning it down was a big challenge. And we pushed it as far as we can go at the time. And that was important to us to, if everyone was chugging, we chose not to chug. We tried to go the opposite direction of where everything was going. Everything was super hard and fast at that time, so we went slow and heavy and deep. We were trying to be, we had songs that never made it to the demo or whatever that we never used because we were very specific about a type of sound that we were looking for. With the album, I think probably represents where we kind of left off the most. Demo, I don't even think we had even gotten to our full experimental phase. Not even close, the demo. Because it didn't even have Tony on the record, on the demo at that point either. We hadn't even met him yet. Into Darkness, I think its beauty is in some of the keyboard work and having the time to really extend certain parts because we had full musical freedom because we originally signed to Future Shock Records, who let us. And we wanted to do. We originally had an interest by earache, and we chose not to do it because we wanted artistic freedom and to do what we wanted to do. And we knew if we went with them, they'd try to influence our cut. We want the black and white cover, like all the groups we love, right? Like Anti-Sect, Amebix, everything was black and white. And we kind of liked that vibe. And we ended up going with Future Shock. They were a local New York label. Ultimately, they went bankrupt right after the record came out, like literally like weeks after it came out. But yeah, Into Darkness, I think definitely, I've always loved Into Darkness. No one seemed to like it when it came out, though. Yeah, it was interesting because when it came out, the record just kind of meandered. It didn't do anything. It just kind of came out. It got a really great review in Kerrang, I remember. Like whatever they used K's or something at the time. It got almost the max amount of K. I think the 5, we got like 4, we were like really excited about it. But then Future Shock went bankrupt and we literally had to fight to get the reels back, which I'm glad we did. And then it just at that point, it kind of took the wind out of the sail. Everyone was like, really playing fast and interested in fast, and we were going the wrong direction. And I think people liked it, but it wasn't enough to switch them over. And then later on, I guess it had a different type of impact. I think when Nuclear Blast reissued it got it out to way more people, and then it started to grow from there. And then just kind of fizzled, and life moved on at that point. And I was already doing Thorn at that point anyway, so Winter was just a thing of the past. Never thought anyone would really get it, and then years later, it ended up being interesting to people. After 2 years later, those scenes still existed. There just was no interest in that style of music. We all have great records in our record collection that we look at the groups like, oh, whatever happened to them? Oh, well, they're gone. They're in oblivion. No one really thinks about them anymore. And I just figured Winter would have been, I liked the record. I was proud of that record. I thought it was well made. And it sounds exactly like what we wanted it to sound like. And just didn't seem like there's any interest. I just think the tides changed. That's all. I think the interest in the masses of that genre of music just kind of changed. The tide went back out. When it came back in, it came in slower. And people were getting probably inundated by super hard fast stuff. So that, just the trend kind of changed, and we were kind of already doing it a couple of years before. So people kind of like, hey, this group was doing this, 10 years earlier. I don't think it hindered it or made that much of a, I don't think it would make, we did tether ourselves with two scenes. We played with all those punk groups, and we were definitely, people said, who did Winter play with? We didn't play in the New York hardcore scene, even though it was thriving. Did we like New York hardcore? Yeah, I used to go to those shows on Sundays, depending on who was playing, almost every Sunday. If there was something going on, I liked that music. It was just... So anyway, yeah, that's my thoughts on it.
You heard from Steven and Triumph of Death from Hellhammer, and then, of course, Winter from Amebix, which, of course, is where the band took their name from. And I'm glad that he confirmed that. He was like, oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, for sure. I wanted to read, I forgot to share this in the first set, but this is from the original album liner notes from 1989. And I thought it kind of sets up Winter in a pretty cool way. It says, the winter way is clear, bonding music and lyrics to set a mood and convey their feelings towards this tumultuous era in which we live. They are the echoes of reality, taking the negative aspects of a problem to generate a positive reaction. The engaged voice of the apocalypse, a soundtrack set to the onslaught of a dark, cold, brutal world. Winter refused to be labeled. On the surface, it would be easy to mistake them for a death metal, thrash metal band, but in no way are they affiliated with that genre of music or the pretentious attitude that sometimes comes with it. Listen and decide for yourself. Winter's goals are to continue on their present course and establish themselves as a force to be reckoned with. They are concerned musicians who care about the state of the planet and the problems that plague modern society, putting words into action by playing to support causes which they believe in. They are not out to preach, but to inform. Their music is part of them and is present in their attitude as a band as well as in their individual personalities. I think
that's like Gojira's trying to do the echo metal thing. I think this kind of beat them to the punch.
Yeah,
but did it in a way that I feel seems more honest.
Sure.
Or it affects me in a way that seems more real and not as
I like
contrived.
those first couple, but I don't pull them out very much. They're one of those bands that I sort of like I appreciate as musicians. Did you go to that Slayer show with McDevitt and I, where Gojira opened up, or was that just McDevitt and I that went to that?
No.
They were really good live, actually. I was impressed with them. I was like, okay, I could see where like if you went and saw them live a couple times. I think it's like Meshuggah. I think when I saw Meshuggah live, I was like, oh yeah, I like this more live than I do pulling a record out. It just, I don't know, for some reason, whatever that sound is, I like intellectually like dig it. But I don't.
I can intellectually understand it, but it doesn't do anything for my soul.
Yeah, yeah.
In a hoity-toity way, you know.
Sure. Yeah, I get it. I
don't feel anything. I appreciate what it takes to make that, but it doesn't do anything for me.
I wonder if like a younger metal generation. I'd be curious. I think Joe Schaefer might be a Gojira fan. I'd have to ask him because he's about a decade.
Chris really likes him too.
Yeah, but that's like more Chris's like kind of aesthetic, I think too.
Yeah.
But I'm curious because Joe's a pretty like, sort of socially aware guy who's like kind of plugged into things. I wonder if like he sees in his like a generation like about 10 years younger than us, like people who are a little bit more engaged with that stuff because of a band like Gojira, who talks a little bit more about environmental stuff and things like that. Because I think I was already so aware of it and already locked in that like when I heard it, I was like, oh, that's cool, but like. I get those ideas from other places or something, but maybe if I was like 16 and I heard like a metal band talking about that,
that's a good way to look at it. Yeah.
Like I remember when I heard Blackened from Metallica and I was like, oh shit, that's Death of Mother Earth, man. They're, that's cool that like a metal band's talking about intelligent shit. I think that meant a lot more to me when I was younger.
Yeah.
Because I was trying to justify metal as being something that wasn't just dumb.
Yeah. I think now I'm much more interested in hearing people's internal struggles than any kind of outward stuff about what, I know everything's fucked up. Like it's always going to be that way. It's we can talk about it, but let's do it in an artful way that's not so on the nose.
Sure. Yeah. And one thing I got from that, I was just reading that excerpt from the reissue that Svart, was it Svart that put out this reissue of this?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. They've got the liner notes from the original 89, from 2011, and new notes from 2020, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And but in the Metal Mind booklet, it's got some kind of different things. And one thing that they said is their goal was to create intelligent and heavy music with a serious message. 1989 demo shows exactly the direction towards which they were heading. Sludgy riffs, low pulsing bass, and deep growling vocals all become Winter's trademark. The music had a specific death metal feel, but conjoined other genres. They didn't need keyboards to build up the melancholic mood at this point. Instead, they used low-tuned guitars implemented by echo effects. So what we're about to hear, and you heard it, that kicked off the show, the Eternal Frost original version, and some of the trio tunes we're going to hear in this next set, you're going to hear like the churning doom riffs. You're going to hear, the dissonant ambient passages, even though they don't yet have the keyboards of Tony, and Tony's going to be a huge addition. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, I kind of mess with some things here. I don't know if you noticed, Mark, but I love how Oppression Freedom / Oppression Reprise opens Into Darkness. And I love the way it sort of just, I don't know, it creates such a mood, and he's going to talk a lot more about it, so I'm not going to go too much into it, but I decided that the way that it opens the record and the way that it goes into Servants of the Warsmen is so sweet when he screams like "Rise" like that. It's like fucking like anthemic in like a Death Doom kind of way.
Rise is a pretty big Amebix thing too.
Exactly. So, but instead of playing the album version of from Into Darkness, I decided I wanted people to hear. I kind of Servants of the Warsmen. I think because it's such a simple Celtic Frost Hellhammer song,
the chugga chugga stuff.
I kind of like the demo version of this song better.
Well, here
I don't know if that makes sense.
I would agree with you. I think the weird thing about Into Darkness, the recording, was it mastered at the Hits Factory? Is that what he was talking about?
Yeah, I think he does talk about that.
You can, if as soon as I heard when he said that, I was like, okay, that makes a hell of a lot of sense because the drums are too high, the vocals are too high, the guitars are buried a little bit, and then like when you listen to the Göden stuff, it's like, oh, that's how it should have sounded.
It's perfect sounding.
Like if you would have, I like it after listening to it a bunch of times, but I think what I really need, what I think the album needed is just push those guitars up 20%.
The way they are a little bit more in the demo.
Yeah,
exactly. Like everything Tony does is fucking mind-blowing.
It's great.
But it's there's just like I said, I think you're
it's
right.
It's produced like a pop record.
Göden is like exactly what both of us want in one record, in some sort of way. So I think I wanted to show that juxtaposition, and we'll hear. You heard the Eternal Frost demo version to kick off the show. Later on in this episode, like I said, you'll hear the other version and judge for yourself.
Sure.
It's
it's
Mark and I have
decision.
we're very much Autopsy fans and
Absolutely.
stuff like and Asphyx fans. So we're kind of drawn to that kind of just
rawness
in the gutter kind of sound a little bit more. Scott Korber called it Hellhammer on barbiturates riffage. And reflections on the effects of human greed on society and the natural world. In a word, oppressive. And Scott Korber is a big Funeral Doom sort of expert from Decibel and things like that. But and you'll hear it in this opening tune, Oppression Freedom. Basically, I wrote, this demonstrates some of the more experimental aspects of the band, even if this is taken from Into Darkness, not the demo. So you'll get to hear kind of the addition of Tony, and we'll talk more about Tony in the next kind of talk set. But he's a keyboard player, keyboard effects, Moog, all kinds of things, piano. I think he's
music aficionado.
Music
record collector.
Yeah, like 20 years older than the rest of the band. You know, and Steven will get into all the Tony stuff a little bit later. But it launches the whole record, and I said it kicks into the iconic opening cut, "Servants of the Warsmen." And we'll have it launch into the Eternal Frost demo version of that song. I said it's a nice use of swirling atmospheric keys from Tony Panisi, I think, so they don't have to rely just on the echo effects from the guitars anymore. I said it's the sort of track that Neurosis would write a couple years later, and certainly bands like Disembowelment, Evoken, and others that would formulate Funeral Doom draw from this pool. I said the song makes me reflect on the post-apocalyptic cover. And we'll talk more about the cover maybe in the next set after we sort of get past the demo material. But
I've got one sidebar to mention real quick. Is the 1990 was a bizarre year in general for music. So I wrote down a selection of
Rust in Peace.
Oh, we've got Facelift from Alice in Chains.
Yep.
Bathory Hammerheart.
Okay.
Black Sabbath Tear.
Yep.
Cannibal Eaten Back to Life.
Yep.
Spiritual Healing from Death.
Mm-hmm.
Left Hand Path from Entombed. In the Name of Suffering from I Hate God.
Yeah.
Maiden, No Prayer for the Dying. Rust in Peace. Cause of Death from Obituary. Frizzle Fry from Primus.
Yeah.
Seasons from Slayer.
Yeah. Symbol of Salvation, Armored Saint.
Yeah. Anthrax, Persistence of Time. Some Conscious Terror from Benediction. Celtic Frost, Vanity Nemesis.
Yeah.
Which is one of my... I enjoy that record quite a bit. It's kind of like a little return to form before they
Tom
dissolve.
has issues with that record.
He does, but they did reissue it in the Noise era, and they didn't do that with Cold Lake.
Okay.
So
he doesn't, I think he can handle
He doesn't
Vanity.
completely hate it.
Yep.
Priest Painkiller. Napalm, Harmony Corruption, Pantera, Cowboys from Hell.
Yep.
Pungent Stench for God, Your Soul, From Me, For Your Flesh, Sumerian Cry from Tiamat, Zisma, another thing that just got reissued on Svart, The Trouble, self-titled, and Paradise Lost, Lost Paradise.
Oh, Lost Paradise, yeah.
Which has a lot of DNA shared.
I was going to say,
this.
Winter and Lost Paradise, those are kind of like
some of the weird, like flangy lead things where the production, which bands going back and listening to it might think that was kind of like a detriment to the sound, but it kind of made the sound for me.
Yeah, and you'll hear some of those flangy leads in this next set of music on one of the few songs that actually didn't get re-recorded for Into Darkness, just the eponymous Winter. And like right away it opens with a riff that could be from Paradise Lost or My Dying Bride, those early sort of stuff. But yeah, so it goes from Oppression, Freedom, Oppression, then it goes into Servants of the Warsmen, the demo version of it. And I just said, personally, I love the murky tone of this version. It has that Severed Survival Autopsy kind of Celtic Frost muddiness to it.
Also vocally is very Chris Reifert.
Yeah. 100%.
Nobody else is really doing anything that enunciated. I mean, Carl Willits was doing it with Bolt Thrower, but it wasn't quite as enunciated as this. And then like later on in when did that stuff start? Mid 2000s or whatever, when Greg McIntosh started doing Valenfire. I feel like this is the same like wheelhouse vocally.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. You mentioned I wouldn't have made you're a much bigger Valenfire fan than I am. I like those records. I just forget about them sometimes because you're such a Gregor guy, you know? It wouldn't have made that connection, but that's kind of a cool little thing, sort of to mention. It's one of the more faster, upbeat songs, which of course Steven sort of knocks later in hindsight because he's more into the sort of slower, more artsy, kind of deliberate sort of stuff. But if you want like a song, kind of a go-to song that kind of he says people live want to hear this song, and I get it because this is kind of like one of those songs. But
it's something you can like there's a hook to grab onto. Although a lot of the stuff is just hard to penetrate.
Sure,
to be honest.
Well, it's funny because in that call and response thing, this is the song that they play. They actually play the Into Darkness version, but they play it for Martin and for Tom. And Martin goes right away, says, "Oh, that's Winter." And Tom says, "It sounds like the rehearsals between Hellhammer and Morbid Tales." He says, "Nice. It's like Celtic Frost, but slower. It sounds like Celtic Frost today." Yeah, and so they were kind of like talking about how the terrorizer person says, yeah, they espouse political and environmental concerns, which was quite unusual at the time. And Martin says, so is a biodegradable CD that rots away in time and leaves no trace. And he kind of has like sort of a laugh about that. But
I miss Martin.
But yeah, so it's kind of fun that they're having some playfulness with this song, but it's not a playful song. I wanted to read the lyrics real quick. I won't do this for too many songs, but just to sort of give you a sense of the aesthetics of this band. He screams rise and he says dark shadows and expectations. And then in parentheses, it says no shadows, no expectations. So it's almost like a counterpoint.
Yeah.
Defiance, unspoken truth, doom-filled ignorance and lust, betrayal of sacred prophecies, invasion of hurt, penetration of sensitivity. What are my secret fears? Red is rain of tears. Come back, dear dreams, tales untold, endless sleep, servant of the warsman. So it's like a
military-industrial complex little talk there.
Screams of passion through the dark, ignored by pain and suffering. Gloomy paths decorate the halls, walls of darkness. Burning hate, flesh. Heaven light, heaven's light, heavenly light. Nevermore, rising conqueror. Forbidden truth, sanctify my fortress. So, I mean, it's very...
Hey, we're coming out of Iraq right now, but we're leaving some of the contractors back. So this all makes all kinds of sense right now.
It's definitely there. And then, it's coming right after a song called Oppression, Freedom.
Yeah.
Kind of an interesting one there. But yeah, so one thing I was going to share in the 2020 booklet real quick, and then we can kind of get into some music here in a second. Maybe not. I lost my place. I'll save it for the next one. Oh, thought it was in there, but Yeah, and then we're going to come out of that, and we'll play the eponymous Winter, which is an instrumental. So we got 2 instrumentals in this set, and I just said some very peaceful 3 pinch harmonics aplenty with its mid-pace rhythmic march. The sound of the permanent environmental apocalypse is in this song. It's the bleakness that Gregor McIntosh and Calvin and Andrew would grow to love, and it bleeds directly into Blackhole, which I believe Blackhole is another one that never got re-recorded for Into Darkness. And I said, man, John sounds like Chris Reifert here. And that lo-fi drum attack by Joe is very crust anarcho.
Yeah.
The riff just churns. The main riff's very discharge-ish until the dirge kicks in. I said, I can hear the influence this might have had on early Cathedral in terms of utter bleakness, you know. I love the riff that leads into the distorted bass breakdown around the 320 mark. And I call it the molasses blast. Yep. Which I said I'm trademarking that. Which emerges... Existence becomes a black hole when the world fails due to human greed. And so, yeah, it's kind of
similar stuff. Chris Reifert thing was
pretty big.
We both got there, yeah.
Yep.
There's a little bit of it's a trouble break.
Oh,
where it kind of where we get the break and then it gets the super catchy groove, little Celtic Frost bits. But yeah, the Reifert thing is kind of undeniable.
Yeah, I'm pissed because I had this kind of part sort of set aside that was going to talk about. Here it is. Just before, when we're kind of in the demo stage, and he kind of talks a little bit about this. So maybe I don't need to share this because he actually covered this. It's just some of the bands that they were playing with at the time, and how Winter was always eliciting a reaction because they played with everyone from Nausea to Sepultura, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, definitely.
And this is from Ron Grimaldi again. He says, for me, they'd perfected all my favorite genres and unified them in a way not previously attempted. Highly professional at a time when that wasn't common. They used custom-made equipment while their contemporary gear appeared, by comparison, to have been found in the trash. Heavier than all other bands they played with, theirs was a vibe and aura which rendered most of the death stuff of the time plastic and insignificant. Absent, too, was the all-pervasive egomania and the general trappings of the metal scene. And in my opinion, they were not so much a metal band, but were more punk in spirit, delivering music so brutal and heavy that metal fans came to respect them. And he says their demo, without doubt, the slowest recording ever, was a conglomerate of riffs of a more warped version of Hellhammer. And they kind of go on from there. So I think that's a really interesting way, and that's something Steven's going to bring up quite a few times throughout the episode, is just the sort of punk spirit of like how they constructed all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So let's get into it. Let's hear, we got Oppression Freedom / Oppression Reprise, which kicks off Into Darkness. And then we'll go into the trio of tunes from the 1989 Eternal Frost or Hours of Doom demo, or whatever you want to call it. We've got Servants of the Warsmen, Winter, and then Blackhole.
Doom groups we really listened to, being honest with you. Celtic Frost, Hellhammer, Carnivore. I mean, not really Doom. I wasn't really that into Venom, really. I mean, Amebix, Discharge, if you took all those together and you threw them in a blender, that was like the DNA of it. And then throw in all the other stuff. Crimson, ELP, all the psychedelic stuff that was happening. And, so definitely. I was listening to a lot of Stravinsky at the time, like Rites of Spring, like Cleveland Orchestra, some classical pieces. I like Stravinsky a lot. It's a little kind of intense. I started listening to some stuff like that as well. And I think some of the way that they were going about it, the long passages, became really interesting to me. And that's kind of, and John too. And we started liking the way those sounded, or like Ma Vishnu Orchestra. There's a song called Winds of Sword. I can't remember the name. It's on Apocalypse. Maybe the second song. But there were sections of songs that we would be like, that's kind of like what we're doing already. How are they doing it? And then we started listening to other stuff. Everything comes from somewhere, right? So I think those two songs specifically were we wanted more of like orchestral kind of thing happening, where it was like a passage, and that's how we looked at them. We just wanted to be passages to the song. Oppression Freedom if you listen to us do that at Roadburn without the keyboards, it sounds totally flat. And that's what Into Darkness I felt sounded like before Tony played keyboards on it. Or if you listen to any of if you go on like YouTube or whatever and you watch us and you play without Tony, I think there's definitely a huge gap. I think he definitely helped us get to that vision that we wanted, because we were never really hearing it. Like, Oppression and Freedom was the last song we put together for Into Darkness. And literally we're like, I like the song. I like the way it moves, but it needs something else. It doesn't need some dude doing guitar solos over on it. It doesn't need that. It needs a texture. It needs something, another layer on top that'll help it float like a bitch's brew, or it'll float along the top. Almost like when you hear Miles' horn, it has like this reverb, chorus delayed thing on it, and that kind of helps you, makes the music feel like it's floating. And the music was already slow already, so I felt like those things, it gave more flavor to what was happening, so people could sink their teeth into it a little bit more, and it wasn't so like mono sounding. You know what I mean? It felt very flat before it had all those elements in there. And those two songs we did do. Power and Might, I don't think we used much keyboard, just some of the Moog sounds. That's all the those like dripping noise. That's just us messing around with his Moog. That's actually him tuning up his Moog, by the way. He's like turned his Moog on. He's like, I have to leave it on for a little while, and he's like tuning it up, because there's all oscillators and capacitors and stuff that they need to warm up. His Moogs are from 1960, right? So time to warm up. I was like, whoa, that's the coolest sound. And he's like, I'm just tuning it up, man. Cool. And next thing I know, the engineer's like, dude, I recorded all that, by the way. I was like, really? I'm like, good. Put that in the middle of Power and Might. So it was experimental, a lot of it at times, things just kind of happening on the fly with it. Well, I didn't really mention this before, but my father was an avid record collector. My father had about 50,000 records. He had his own record label called Bim Bam Boom, which was a vocal doo-wop label here in New York. And his record, and my mom was pregnant with me at Woodstock. So my parents were both music people. Me and my brother, who's a recording engineer, we went to every single JVC Jazz Festival. We were like the little kids that were running around the audience at 6 years old. And every one of them, because my parents went to them. And my father took me and my brother to music things all the time when we were children. But when I became a teenager and I started listening, my first, okay, my dad would give me and my brother 10 records when we started getting into music. Check these out. Tell me what you like. One of the first records he gave me was a Led Zeppelin record. I think it was Led Zeppelin 2. I heard the guitar solo on Whole Lotta Love. I was like, whoa, that's crazy. I love that. It resonated with me. I was into like BMX bikes and jumping off ramps. I was like a hyperactive kid. I was like, this music's great. Next thing I know, he goes, oh, you like that? What about these other records? Like, I don't really like. What don't you like? I don't like this part. It sounds too happy or whatever it is. But I like this. We go into his record collection. We grab another couple of records. He goes, take this. When he gave me Black Sabbath, I heard the song War Pigs. As soon as I heard Ozzy say, generals gathered in this mass, I was like, what? This is crazy. I love this. Black Sabbath became my life for like years. But all those records, when he would give me those records as a young person, I was literally 9 years old. I knew how to flip a record over by the edges and drop the needle on it because my father was a record collector. My brother too. So he would give me records. And as I was getting into more music, all the Miles Davis records, all the Coltrane records, all the Mingus records, all that stuff, 100% came from my dad's record collection. As I got into new music and other stuff, he would say, check this out, check that out, check this out. And I would listen to it and I would kind of like report back. When I was a teenager, my father had a record room. It was floor-to-ceiling records, these big oak cabinets with the ladder that goes around the room, 50,000 records. It was like, I don't know if you remember, but there was a Maxell commercial. It was like the guy sitting in the chair. My dad was that guy. He had a record room, had two big speakers that were about 4 feet tall on each side. He had a big chair that flipped back with a little table on the side for his espresso. He grabbed his records. He turned around. He had his turntable with his diamond in the needle. He was into it. That was his record room. My friends would come over as a teenager. Like when I was around 16, my friends were all into music or whatever. And say I was getting ready to go out or whatever. They'd chill out in my dad's record room. Before you know it, we were there till 1 o'clock in the morning. My dad would be pulling records out. You guys like this? You like that? Oh, I'm pulling them out. He was a music person. My parents were supportive. They also came to all those, not all of them, but quite a few of the Squad Rock shows, the shows at Sundance. They just went in the back. They didn't come over and say hello to me. They give me a little nod, yo, good show, whatever, and they left. They were supportive of me and my brother being artistic and free. And that was really helpful. I tried the jazz stuff earlier, but until he gave me Bitches Brew, I wasn't interested in it. Like, you could have given me In a Silent Way, and I wouldn't have really been that into it. A little quiet still yet, right? But he gave me Bitches Brew. And I remember what he gave me. He gave me Bitches Brew, Band the Gypsies live at the Fillmore, King Crimson Red. But he would give me some records, and I would kind of report back. And that was pretty much how it started. I got into all the Miles stuff, and I'd be like, yo, John, check this shit out. This shit's fucking crazy. And he put it on with, and next thing I know, we had this record thing. The thing that's interesting about it is Tony and my father never met, but they knew of each other because they were record collector community. My father this is before the internet, so someone used to have to go and take every 45 that came out and put the year, the publisher, the writers, all that, and they would call them. They would call. I can't remember the name. So my father and his friend Tony Tisvik out in Las Vegas. They were those people. They would catalog. We're talking like serious record geeks here, right? So they would catalog all these records, and they would go back and forth, and they would catalog them. People like Phil Spector and people like that, when they would write books, they would contact my father for information about certain music that he was an aficionado in. And so in our house, this file cabinets full of like record things of like on paper, on filing cards and stuff. So they were this was like a pretty musical kind of family going on with all those kind of things happening. So yeah, I was pretty fortunate. So Tony and my father knew of each other because Tony's also an avid record collector and had my dad's records on his record label, which was called Bim Bam Boom. They never met. They spoke on the phone after Into Darkness came out. My father said, Tony, you did a brilliant job on the record. They spoke a couple of times, and then my father passed away a couple of years after that. So, so that's so most people don't really know much about that part of it.
That was Black Hole, Winter, Servants of the Warsmen, and then we started off with the instrumental Oppression, Freedom, Oppression, Reprise.
I'd like to say that Black Hole is with a WHOLE.
Yeah, interesting. What do you think that? You think it's kind of like
soul, man?
The whole world, kind of. I don't know.
That could be. I've never seen it. I like plays on words like that. It's fun.
It's kind of interesting. One cool note about the demo, as we're about to move fully into darkness, is it was re-released, as I said, in '94 by Nuclear Blast, and they included another kind of noisy experimental instrumental that was called Manifestation, which kind of points the way towards like the drone movement of like, you know, Sun-O and bands like that a little bit. And then it was sort of omitted originally in the booklet. So if you have that 94 version, there's just this song that just kind of shows up at the end. And then it was
like a hidden track or something.
Yeah, and it was produced by Greg Marcock and Winter, who I think Greg Marcock...
He did Into Darkness.
He did Into Darkness, yeah. So it was just kind of one of those weird, like, sort of unreleased kind of things. So, and it's interesting because the manifestations are going to show up later on the Göden record, a whole bunch of those, and Steven will kind of speak to that when he gets into the Göden stuff a little bit later. And speaking of Göden, the next song we'll play is the aforementioned Göden. So as he says in one of the interview clips you'll hear, you know, we took Winter from Amebix, and then I took Göden from Winter. So it's just kind of passing the
But
the
they
torch.
added an umlaut.
That they did, yes. In Darkness comes out in 1990. All right, they signed to Future Shock Records. Like I said, the album's later reissued, but it got kind of poor promotion from Future Shock, and
They kind of went out of business. Right after that came out.
Exactly.
Kind of like I don't know if you've been watching any of the Anthrax 40th anniversary.
I'm up
thing,
through some of it. Yeah,
but the Volume 8, whatever the hell the subtitle of that was.
Yep.
That came out on like some small sub label that immediately went out of business right when that came
Who
out.
put that out? Like Sanctuary or Spitfire?
It was a sub label of a larger company that was bought out through somebody else.
Yeah, because they kind of after I think stopped 424.
The Threat is Real, or Volume 8, The Threat is Real, or something like that. It's something.
But I think after Stomp, that was the last one on like a major label.
Yeah.
On Island, and I think they kind of got smaller after.
And then
that.
after this, whatever that Volume 8, then they did. Then there had been a Nuclear Blast ever since.
Oh, so that last Bush record was Nuclear Blast from
I believe
03?
so,
Okay, yeah, I can't remember. It's got a long title. I'm trying to remember what that last Bush record from like 03 is. So
The one right before Worship Music.
yeah, there was like a big like 8-year gap between Bush's ending and then Joey coming back, but
that's for another show. But
yeah, for sure. But 2 years later, like I said, Nuclear Blast puts it out, but they're pretty much kind of breaking up at that point, you know?
Yeah.
And in the new booklet, or the new re-release on Svard, you know, Ron Grimaldi goes on to say, and he wrote this in January 2011, he says, just when it seemed audiences were beginning to grasp what they were doing, the band became inactive, withdrawing from live performance due to subsequent issues with their label and drummer. And Steven talks about the drumming issues. Despite the loss of momentum, Winter continued to exist, working on new material, which unfortunately never saw the light of day. And then we'll kind of talk about the aftermath, soon after that. But we do have this document of Into Darkness, and the album was actually put together by Veronica Cross, I believe.
Yeah, the artist.
Yeah, and the photo on the front is from Stalingrad, and for those of you, most of you, I hope, who are longtime listeners. If not, I teach world history, and Stalingrad is it's kind of the turning point of World War II, at least the European front. If you've seen the movie Enemy at the Gates, they kind of do a little bit kind of on that from it's an American movie, but it's still pretty good and kind of does the trick in giving at least like a feel for what it was like. But I always tell my kids, like, the Volga River, which is like the river that Stalingrad sits on, is like sort of the main waterway from the Caspian Sea where the Russians or the Soviets would get like their energy resources, the oil from the Persian Gulf, up through the Caspian. And so the goal of the Nazis was to, if they could cut off Stalingrad, they would essentially cut off the energy supply for the whole Soviet Union, and then they could basically get the Soviets to tap out. So like after the Soviets defeated the Nazis, or I don't know if I would say defeated, they withheld them from taking Moscow due to the winter.
Yeah.
And then they were holding out in Leningrad, which is St. Petersburg up in the north. Basically the Nazis laid an 800-day siege on Leningrad and starved out 1.5 million Soviets. Like, they were eating their shoes, and they were going like door to door, killing every fucking Soviet citizen there. So like those were their 3 pinch points, and the Soviets were surviving at those other 2. So they're like, well, let's put all our concentrated effort at Stalingrad. And so they just decimate the city, and the Nazis overtake Stalingrad, but essentially the Soviets won't let them take hold of it completely. So every single day they're sending like boatloads of troops of Soviets across the Volga River to like reoccupy or try and push the Nazis out. So I always kind of explain to my students, and they kind of understand this. Many of them have seen the opening of, Saving Private Ryan with the beach scene at Normandy and stuff. I say, imagine on a smaller scale that every single day you're having like a beach at Normandy. Like every single day, you're just sending more, like if the Soviets would jump off the boats on their way to Stalingrad, because a lot of them, when they saw the city, and you can see just how like destroyed it is, it's basically like these.
It's smoke and a couple chimneys left.
Yeah, it's just like a furnace, it just looks like utter post-apocalyptic destruction. And a lot of people, when they would see that, would jump off the boats, and so then the Russians would just shoot the people in the water. Mm-hmm. Like you didn't have a choice to retreat. Like every single day you're going to go into Stalingrad, and it's this just hellscape that was like...
Do you know what the cost of human life was during that?
I think 1.1 million
Russians?
People die at Stalingrad. The Nazis paid... Basically, Stalingrad's a turning point of the whole war.
Yeah.
Because when the Soviets finally defeat the Nazis at Stalingrad, they kind of start what's called the 1,000-mile push. And that's where they essentially link up troops in Leningrad, Moscow, and Stalingrad, and they do a 1,000-mile march to Berlin. And it's the longest continuous march of an army in human history. And that's when they reoccupy or liberate Poland, all of Eastern Europe, and then Stalin's basically like at the end, like, fuck you, Germany, you've attacked me twice in 20 years, we want a buffer zone. And we weren't prepared to continue to fight the Soviets after we defeat the Nazis.
It took us long enough to get into the war to begin with.
We're not in any kind of like... Stalin's got the upper hand. He's got the leverage, and he's kind of like, hey, we just lost...
He put in the work.
26 million people to defeat the Nazis. Did you?
Yeah.
So are you going to tell me not... so it's... I'm oversimplifying this. It's much more complicated. But,
sure, but that's the gist of the...
But so that image, and if you know what's happening in Stalingrad and like what the lyrics are about and stuff like this, and I bring up this quote to Stephen in the interview that I've read before, that people often refer to Into Darkness as the album and the music that's made after the events of War Pigs from Black Sabbath. It's like Mad Max, post-apocalyptic. Like this is what we've done as humans. Like we brought this
War
on
Pigs
ourselves.
is the warning, and this is the aftermath.
Exactly. Like we fucked this up. We did this kind of thing. And so I find that to be something really cool about the cover and stuff. And this is kind of interesting. This is in the original Metal Mind reissue from 2010, 2009, whenever this came out. And it's very like it's just the way it's written is cool. It's like it's almost like a diatribe, or like you're part of like a cult or something, like what winter really is. It says the winter way is clear, bonding music and lyrics to set a mood and convey their feelings towards the tumultuous era in which we all live. They are the echoes of reality, taking the negative aspects of a problem to generate a positive reaction. The enraged voice of the apocalypse, a soundtrack set to the onslaught of a dark, cold, brutal world. Winter refused to be labeled. On the surface, it would be easy to mistake them for death metal, thrash metal, but in no way are they affiliated with that genre. Oh, I already read that sort of part. Winter's goals are to continue their present course and establish themselves as a force to be reckoned with. Winter are concerned musicians who care about the state of the planet and the problems that plague modern-day society, putting words into action by playing to support causes which they believe in. They are not out to preach, only to inform. I think I mentioned that before. And so, yeah, it's just interesting how they're like the winter way, winter refuse. It's almost like it's like the KISS Army. They're like a singular force. They're not just three members. They're winter. I thought that was kind of cool.
They're not just these three people, but a force of nature.
This is like an aesthetic. Like they have an ideology almost.
Yeah, the whole idea of the nuclear winter is, basically what Amebix was talking about in that song, and that's it's winter, but in a way bleaker way than it normally is.
Yeah.
You're not going to be catching any rabbits in a snare or in a everything's fucking dead.
Yes. Yeah. And that's kind of what happened to the Stalingrad itself. Is like they were literally going house to house, door to door, just killing every human that sort of lived there.
Yeah, so, that movie probably shows like 2% of how awful it really was, but it was still like, Jesus Christ, man.
And then, the scene that always confuses my kids is like when the Soviet troops are like running into the city, and then like they're getting their asses kicked and decimated by German machine guns. So they turn around and run back, and then the Soviets just start firing on their own people. Yeah. They're like, there's no retreat. Like, we're going to kill you. Or you might as well just go die. Like we have no, like, and I get it, because in a sense, like the Soviets, like I explain this to like my students all the time, like, Hitler's plan for the Soviet Union is he called it Lebensraum, which is living space. And he essentially was he called that the liquidization of the East. Like he's going to liquidate everybody.
Yeah.
Like he wanted to kill every Soviet citizen. It's not Occupy. It's not England. He had respect for England and France. They're Aryan people or whatever. So he was like, you're my enemy, but I like respect you as humans. So I'm not going to like exterminate you. But like he wanted to resupply the German population by just populating the decimated Soviet Union. So the Soviets, like, if they lose, it's not like a normal surrender in a war.
Yeah. Well,
like,
to some degree,
no choice but to fight literally for your existence.
Hitler must have known the resolve of the Soviet citizen, and he didn't want to have to deal with that, so it'd be easier just to annihilate.
Absolutely. Yeah, he knew. Well, and I mean, that's part of the reason Hitler committed suicide at the end of the war, because of the rumor that was floating around that Stalin was going to basically take Hitler back to the Moscow Zoo and put him on display. Because like that's how.
Well, he didn't kill himself. He got his head taken out. He has his brains in a jar somewhere.
Oh, Hitler does?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It's just his body's there. It's
not
his brain.
Sure. Well, yeah, they can put him in a new. That sounds like a plot for like a cool zombie movie of some sort. Hitler zombies.
There's lots of comics and sci-fi novels that have pontificated about that.
But it is really fascinating, because I think I don't think a lot of Americans really grasp, because we see ourselves as the heroes of World War II, and we certainly were, if you want to call it heroic, what we did in the Pacific, firebombing 58 cities and
a little brutal
wooden cities, and dropping 2 atomic bombs.
We waited until they came to our back door and we're like, oh shit, we should probably do something.
I mean, again, we had to defend it. I get it. But
we've never had our homeland really attacked in any kind of military way ever.
Sure. Yeah.
We had like 9/11 was a fluke. Pearl Harbor was
sure.
How many people really, killed? It was like a strategic attack. It wasn't.
Yeah.
We've never had an occupying force here.
And I don't think I don't think a lot of Americans, because of the way American textbooks have been sort of written, really understand. Like D-Day was important, but it was like a sideshow.
Well, of course, yeah.
It alleviated a little bit of the pressure, and Stalin was begging for us to do that. We were also coming up, obviously, through Italy, too, but like 80% of the Nazis were fighting the Soviet Union. So, like, the Soviets defeat Germany. We defeat Japan. That's very clear. You know, like, but I think there's this American exceptionalism sort of attitude that we think we like defeated Hitler. It's like, no, the Soviets sacrificed 26 million people to defeat Hitler. We helped.
We have certain ideas that help, you know, the idea of what America is to keep going. And I mean, every country's got their BS bullshit that kind of, you know, keeps
but I think
the
American
narrative going.
exceptionalism, unfortunately, has been something like in history that has like gotten us in trouble in the last like century, because we have it more. It's like England in the 1800s.
Yeah,
England had that.
It also
sort of
trickles
attitude.
down to people that have no inherent skill or value, thinking that they're better than they really are, and shitting on other people of different ethnic minorities.
It's nationalism, right?
Yeah,
you find your value from the fact that you won the geography lottery. Like, cool.
Yeah.
You know, hillbilly Jim, like you fucking,
or that we like had refuge, like let a bunch of Germans come in, then we made the bomb, and then we fucking destroyed the country in an awful fucking way. That
So speaking of destructive sort of things, I just thought it was interesting to kind of give a little historical narrative.
I don't think there's enough of that.
Even Steven didn't really know it was Stalingrad. He's like, I knew it was from World War II, but so he was kind of like, oh, I'll take your word for it.
Yeah. It even kind of reflects the idea of the album even more.
Mm-hmm. We kind of get into what I would call like the centerpiece of the record. You know, two of the towering, I think, most important songs in Göden and Destiny, kind of linked together by Power and Might, which is another one of these interesting instrumental tracks that Tony was really involved in sort of composing and getting together. You know, basically the song Göden, it's Dutch for the gods. And I said the way that Tony's keyboards add this rolling atmosphere to the songs on Into Darkness as a whole is really cool and really personified in this song. And I think this is one that Steven looks fondly upon. He talks about it. We'll probably play that in the next interview set of clips. But yeah, I mean, songs like this 8-minute crushing dirge, I just said, put the record in elite company. I said, with Affix's The Rack and Autopsy's Mental Funeral for that truly unique meeting of death and doom.
Yeah, even with Göden, there's this little bit that's almost is like 2 notes away from the Locust Star break.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of neurosis-y kind of stuff happening.
Like the swirling before the the hook, you know.
And of course, we talked about it and we even brought it up to Steven, but I said, how fucking amazing is that sick, that after he
little sample
deafening screams.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's a cool story. I'll let Steven tell that story because it's a fun one in terms of where that came from and all that. But rolling drums again, I call it rolling drums. How would you, as a drummer, sort of describe it? Is it like the like you said, the kind of,
you're almost playing like the toms. You're not playing the snares or the snare or any of the.
Is there a better term
really
for that? I don't
know if there's a real
drums.
musical term for. I mean, there's the unfortunately the '90s tribal drum thing that
because we were talking about that before.
Coming up, but I think that's just like a lack. It's more of like a hand drumming aesthetic that's kind of transposed onto a drum kit.
Got it.
But it's almost like a loop.
Okay. Yeah. It gives
and then it builds, and you can like add like just like little cymbal hits here and there to kind of build this like. Neurosis did
like
it
oscillating.
More as like an undulation.
Thing. Yeah, undulating,
where
oscillating.
Like right before it like just explodes.
Sure. It's like the moving force of like a crowd. Like
Yeah.
Really cool, noisy, chaotic solo. It's definitely one of the highlights for me of this whole record. It's
I would agree.
Cool. Then you get Power and Might, which is this sort of interlude, connective tissue between these kind of, I said, these 2 twin tower epics of oppression. I said it's like the slowest drumming ever. Almost like a Melvin's like test of patience, like sludge thing that they would do. Like, I think there's something on Houdini. It might be Spread Eagle Beagle or another song where it's like, doof, doof. You're just like, Jesus Christ. You know,
I figured out where, what's his name now? I can't. The original My Dying Bride drummer.
Oh, Aid? Yeah.
Absolutely. That's where he got his doom. Like the Sear Me drum bit, and
that's another part.
And like the stuff I think what Cathedral wanted to do on drums is what Winter did, but Mike Smale came in.
He was too advanced almost.
Which I love that he did too. Lots of fills and stuff to try to because playing slow sucks. It's hard.
Very hard. Well, and they even Steven talks about how frustrated Frank was, the guy they brought in as the studio session guy or whatever.
Like if you're like, start playing drums as a little kid and you've got an internal metronome that's just right on, but it's hard to keep that slow without adding anything as just something as like another cue for you to know where the fuck to go next.
Oh, sure.
Because I've seen like Paul Bearer, in their early years played pretty slow.
Some slow stuff.
And I remember seeing what the drummer would do. He would almost swing his hand a little bit before he hit to almost timing in the air a little bit.
Yeah.
To come down.
Because you got to keep a beat somehow.
Yeah.
In between.
You can't, something that slow, you've got to, either it's like a muscle memory thing or you create a movement out of your body. Watch Mickey D play with King Diamond or with Motorhead or with Scorpions now. And you can kind of see his little ticks he does that keeps him in line. But
now you brought up Cathedral. You said you heard Lee talk a little bit about this record somewhere.
There was an interview early on where he was talking about somebody asked where, that why go so slow?
Yeah.
Or not even necessarily that, but just he was bringing in the only people that are really doing anything this slow was Winter and what was the other? I told you earlier. Now I don't remember where it is in my
Dream
notes.
Death. No. Trying to think who you were mentioning before.
I thought I circled it. My notes are always way more specific when I'm doing them, and then when I try to look back at them, they're not as easy to.
That's right.
To digest.
I fall into that trap a little bit too.
I'll think of it and come up with it later.
So what happens with that song, Power and Might, is it kind of segues beautifully right into Destiny. And I said, Destiny picks up the pace with that molasses blast again. I said, I Hate God would perfect the molasses blast because they're coming out of that's, kind of a punk roots and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think it's something about the punk sludge blast beat. Melvin's probably do it a little bit too as well. I just said, what insane drum production. Really interesting kind of what they do with the warlike drums throughout this song. Screaming Chaos is my destiny over and over. Pretty cool. I said it's the bottom in the song really collapses out of Destiny after about 2.5 minutes into this. I just wrote utter post-apocalyptic oppressiveness. It's really difficult to describe this atmosphere of despair. I said it's like being crushed by a glacier. It's heavy, cold, and slow. So it's like a slow fucking crush. It's not pounding you like death metal would or Bolt Thrower or something like that.
Yeah.
I said I can feel the freezing to death in the tundras of a Siberian gulag with a sky full of stars and a moon glancing down upon you. I was getting apparently poetic when I was doing this. But, again, a cool guitar solo. I said that picks up the tempo near the end. I said, but man, does this song drain you? I just wrote, why the fuck are we doing this series in the summer again? It's just this is it's clearly winter, so it's the opposite of what summer music is.
Well, it started to make more sense with Acid Bath, but that was when the humidity was starting to hit.
Sure. That's
spring.
Louisiana, sludge, right?
The oppression started to make sense, but now it's not. Sometimes I think the doom in the summer is too much.
Yeah.
It's too bleak because it's already oppressive, the humidity and everything. At least for me as a person of, European ancestry that doesn't really like heat or humidity. Yeah. I'm more of a Canadian where I'd be happy with being at 60 degrees all the time. It's that's the hottest it ever gets. But
move to Calgary and be neighbors with Brett the Hitman Hart. It'd be great. I come visit you and we can hang out. But
we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. I did comment to Mark that ever since in Michigan, since we started this series, we've just brought on just floods and nonstop rain and dreariness, and it's just
my basement's flooded.
Mine was had a little water sort of rolling through earlier today, so it's been interesting. So maybe we've cursed ourselves with shitty weather because
do we have any bands that really talk about the brutality of weather?
I'm sure someone. I have to think on that one. Yeah, let us know. Shoot us an email if you could think of some good weather related death metal or doom metal bands. So. But yeah, let's get into it. We've got, Göden is the proper pronunciation of that, Power and Might, and then Destiny from Winters Into Darkness.
Revealing fear and
by the time the winter album was done, I was doing Thorn, I wasn't even listening to heavy music anymore. I was listening to like Miles Davis' Bitches Brew at that, and like, you know, all the live Miles Fillmore East records. I was addicted to those records for like, and all those records. That's basically all I listened to. Me and John, like I said, we were roommates, and we used to literally try not to listen to current music that was happening at the time because we did not want to be influenced by it. And I still currently do that now. Like, I don't even own a Paradise Lost record. I don't own an Autopsy record. I don't even know what I mean, I guess I can go on YouTube and listen to them. People have compared it. But after that earlier stage of writing, after the Into Darkness was done, there was no interest. I lost interest in the heavy stuff. I only did the Thorn thing because Nausea broke up around the same time as we did. And those were like my boys, Roy and John from Nausea. So we just were having drinks one night. I said, fuck it, let's just do it us. Let's just do something new. Do something heavy and a little more industrial sounding and just break it up a little bit. So, but I wasn't really listening to any heavy stuff at that point in time, unless someone gave me something, was like, yo, check this out. This is really cool. I was just listening to a lot more, you know, fusion jazz at that point. And I still listen to that music. That stuff will always hold a place in my soul. That music taught me how to think differently as far as musically, because they were structured completely different. They weren't like your standard song structures, verse, chorus, bridges, and, you know, repeating them, whatever. They were just free form. So right after the album came out, we had a lot of drummer problems with Winter. The drummer who played on Into Darkness quit in the middle of the recording of it. It was a different guy, Frank, but then not from Brutal Truth. He filled in. There's actually a YouTube video of him playing. I can't remember where we played, but we tried to write some new material after Into Darkness. Scott helped us out, and he came in. He was actually a pretty good replacement, and he was great to be in the studio with. He was just easy person to be around. And then at that point, it kind of like the label going bankrupt and us fighting for, like, literally going to the warehouse with baseball bats and be like, give me my fucking masters back, I'm going to break your fucking head. And that basically how we got the masters back. We had a friend who worked in the warehouse, and he said, yo, these guys are packing up shit right now. Your guys are going to be done. It was in Valley Stream, Long Island, and me and John went down there and we took care of shit. But it was fine. They gave us freedom. The real reverted back to us. We had ownership of our music again. So that was kind of, we tried to with Scott, and then just, I don't know, it was like to put more energy into something that didn't really have so much interest. You know, it took us, we started writing that album started getting written in 1988, the demo. And then I think we completed Into Darkness in 89. And then it was released. It was completed, and then we chose not to release it because something was missing. And then our friend worked at a record store called Titus Oaks Records, and the manager of the store was Tony. Tony is a bit older than us. So actually, like maybe 20 years older than us. So we met him, and we went to his house, and we went in his basement. And dude, it was like, you have like, 18, 19-year-olds going in this like musician's basement that played with guys from Deep Purple and, Sir Lord Baltimore and stuff like that. And his basement was just like, 2 mini Moogs, Hammond organ with 2 Leslie cabinets, Fender Rhodes, a Wurlitzer, ARP string on side, like around him, like Keith Emerson, in a basement where basically amazing musicians had been rehearsing for decades. And Tony's like a adamant record collector. He's got like 60,000 records. And he's a collector, and he does all the record shows in Williamsburg when they do them. He has a table there and everything. He's like, he's the real deal, Tony. We met him, and dude, he just played a couple of notes on that Moog and twirled a couple of knobs, and I was like 18 years old, and I was like, whoa, this guy is wicked. This is what we missed. Like, me and John literally were looking for something to add another layer, because it felt boring to us, like, without that. Because at that point we started listening to Miles, and it was a no-brainer. It was dark already. Everything about it was just perfect. So I'll never forget when we brought Tony to the studio. We had already completed Into Darkness. We hadn't mixed it yet. The engineer who mixed that album, Greg Marshak, was also an older cat. So he was like probably similar age to Tony. And I'll never forget, he brought his Moog in, and he brought his ARP, and we were looking through the glass at him, and he's warming up, and the first song we did was the song Goden, and he goes, I have a couple of ideas, he's telling me if you guys like it, just give me a thumbs up through the glass. Literally, he just started playing, and the engineer who'd been working with like a lot of people, he like muted the mic. He goes, dude, where did you guys find that fucking guy? And I'm like, was a manager at a record store my friend works at, Bob Barry. And we finished up, and for Tony it was like a joke. And like I said, he's like a a real musician, studied musician. He plays organ in churches and stuff like that. So he laid his tracks down on a couple of the songs, and we moved on. We felt we made a great record, and we were happy with it. Dude, we were like the happiest people on the planet. The guy knew what we were looking for exactly. Like, even today with Göden, like, I love writing with Tony. I'm actually meeting with him tonight to write music for the new album. Super smart. He keeps it real. Like, I'll come up with ideas, and he just kind of like, I don't know about that note, Steph. Like, oh, yeah, that's cool, because his vocabulary is far superior than mine will ever be. And, I let him kind of do what he wanted and steered him a little bit. But in general, he always knew what the music needed. And he's not an overplayer. He's not like one of those guys like, hey, check me out. I could do the sickest, solo. He's not that person at all. That's the one thing I love about Tony. It's like, if you watch him on his own and he does some rips, he really rips. But he doesn't care about that. He's like, whatever. That's not what the music needs. He's a real team player. Tony made a huge influence with Winter, and I think he helped the record to pop. And our friendship, we've been friends ever since that first day we met. I've been close friends with him. I think, well, when I gave Tony like the rough mixes, and I said it to him, he goes, "Oh, okay." He just listened to it. He's like, this is like, I know what I need to do on here. And he just kind of did his own thing. He could hear the music was dark, and he knew what it was. He just did his eerie. He basically using the same keyboards that he used on Into Darkness. He used them on the Goden record. All the equipment that was on Into Darkness that we used to record it, we used to record the Goden record. It's been literally sitting in his basement almost for like decades. My equipment, his equipment, nothing's moved. All the drums have microphones on them still from the Goden recording. And he just like does his thing, man. He's a monster. Joe Concalves played drums and wrote the music with us. Okay. He wrote all the music with us. The demo and Into Darkness. Joe was a bit older than us, and he was at a different stage in his life. Joe was like getting married and wanted to have kids and everything, and whatever. It was a winter demo at that point. There was no Into Darkness, but he wrote all the music with us. And he just said, "Hey man, I'm getting married. I can't really be rehearsing with you guys like 4 times a week, you know." He's our buddy, and I'm so great friends with Joe. And I said, "Listen, do your thing. You're getting married. That's a big deal in your life. Go ahead." So we found another drummer through a friend. His name was Frank. And he basically took all our rehearsal tapes and just basically replayed what Joey had. And then he performed on the album. And then Scott came in, and just when we were trying to like get it going again, like right after the album came out, Frank just never really worked out. And he was like literally arguing with us in the recording studio when we were recording the album. He was like an afterthought that was coming in that was going to play on the record, but he's like, "It's too slow. No one's going to like this." I'm like, "Listen, you didn't write the music. You just play drums." He's like, speed it up. No one's going to like this. They're going to fall asleep." And I'm like, "Dude, this is what we're doing. This is what mine and John's vision is. It's going to be super slow." And then him and John just like went head to head, and then basically threw his sticks on the floor. I'm like, "You guys suck. Fuck you. I'm leaving." He just finished his drum. He finished his last song, threw the drumsticks on the floor, told us to go fuck ourselves. Nothing will ever come of this album. Fuck you. And I never spoke to him ever again. Played 2 shows with us, and we wrote a new song with Scott. Then nothing ever happened with it. We tried to write. He was great. It was just timing, really. But that was the lineup. So Joey wrote the lyrics. Joey helped us write the music. And a different drummer played on the album. We go to shows and stuff like that, and I just met him, and he liked Winter already. He'd already had Into Darkness. He loved it. And then, like I said, we met through mutual friends. You go to shows or whatever, and we're looking for someone. We put the word out, and we tried quite a few people, and we liked Scott. Scott was cool. I don't think they really did anything, EQ'd it or anything. I think they had to master it to put it on, like, it came off of it, that time. Yeah, it was recorded to a 16-track, Ampex 496 tape and everything, but then it got mixed down to the 1/4-inch, and then we mastered it. And then we sent, and that was our demo. And then me and John manufactured cassettes, and then we gave them that DAT tape that was mastered. And I don't think they EQ'd it or did anything. They might have done something to it. Who knows? It came off of a DAT, right? So, and then that was it. But Into Darkness, people don't realize this, but we were very fortunate that album was mixed by Greg Marshak. Like we told you, it wasn't like some young cat. He was an older cat. He was a real recording engineer. And when we came time to master that record, Into Darkness, it was mastered at the Hit Factory. I don't know if you know, the Hit Factory might not be around anymore, but the Hit Factory is like top 40 records. Secondary mastering house that has like a line, like 6 months to get in. Well, Greg was friends with someone the people who owned Future Shock were friends with someone at that studio, and they snuck us in like midnight, and they mastered that album at the Hit Factory. That album was really mastered like a Michael Jackson album. Like literally, I went there. Me and John went there with Greg while the mastering engineer was there, and they were getting ready to master that album and cut all the low end and all that shit. Me and John didn't know anything, and our engineer walks over to the mastering engineer and literally said to him, "Hey, you hear all that shit down on the low end, all that rumbling that's all over the fucking place?" And the engineer goes, yeah, I hear all that. He goes, "Leave that shit in. They like that. Do not remove that." And we were like, okay, cool. and they left. That was basically how that recording sounded, and they just did what they did to make it work in a CD format. But yeah, we were very fortunate that Greg came with us to the mastering and said that, because that album might not sound that way. The guy at the Hit Factory was cracking up, and he loved us. We came in there, like we're like a smelly, like squatter-looking guy. And they're like, "Who the fuck are these guys?" Basically, And we came in with our engineer. It was important to us, Into Darkness, that record sounded that way. There was no way we were not going to be part of every single aspect of it. Like I said, me and John lived together. We were roommates. We lived, breathed, and ate making that record. We rehearsed. Me and John, basically, he was my roommate. He did roofing all day. I put car stereos in. At the end of the day, I got home at like 6 o'clock. I changed my dirty work clothes. I put clothes on. John jumped in my car. We went to the rehearsal studio. We were there 5 days a week. That's what we did for enjoyment. That's what we wanted to do. We were in there 5 days a week, and Joey would join us like 3 days out of that. And we would go in that room with pedals and amps and fucking around and just doing it. I didn't have a girlfriend at the time. John didn't either. We were just two guys. What do? We'd rehearse, and then we'd go out and get drinks and party or do whatever we wanted. Unlimited time. And we were doing what we loved anyway. So it wasn't like it was like, oh, we got to go to rehearsals. Like, there was no cell phones then. There was nothing. You couldn't even text then. There was nothing. So that was like, you wanted to talk to someone, you dialed them up on a fucking rotary phone and you called them up. So things were a little bit different back then. So, yeah, there was a lot of work that went into that album for sure. It's not, people think we just threw that shit together in like 2 seconds, and it's not that way at all. I think it took some time for people to digest it. And, I mean, listen, I thought we put everything we had into it at that point in time for a bunch of 18, 19, maybe 20-year-olds. I think like, we've had no real life experiences except for Tony. Had no real life music experiences. We literally put everything we had into it. I mean, everything with the experimentation of the tuning, the instruments, the strings, great engineer that we just happened to fall on our lap. Tony just fell on our lap. I mean, I think a lot of the planets were in alignment too, and we were surrounded by some people that didn't look at us like we were crazy. Like the engineer would always say to me and John when we were doing that album, he would be like, "You guys are not really like musicians. You guys are artists." And I'd be like, "What do you mean by that?" He goes, "Well, listen, I've recorded a lot of people, and these guys come in here and they're like virtuosos, right? But they write lame songs because all they're focused on is just like a lead or a showing off or whatever it may be. And you guys don't have any of that. Your thing is just 100% like a soundscape, your music. You're more concerned with textures and stuff like that." Because I consider that more, you guys are more like artists than you are like musicians. You're looking at perceptually a little bit different. So yeah, I knew we were different, but luckily we had people around us that didn't look at us like we were crazy, and they helped us. They helped us achieve that sound. I think coming from a punk background, which is kind of like a little bit of like fuck the rules. I don't have to. I could, like I still consider like a lot of my playing to be very like punk rock in a lot of ways. Like my hand positioning is horrible and certain things about it. And I do think that you come into it. If you come from like a background like that, where you're already, like I said, 1988, I mean, about 86, I was like 16 years old. I knew I was different already at that point. No one had to tell me that I was different. I could just look around and tell that I was different. I was wearing different clothes, listening to different music. My interests were 100% different. The only thing that was the same about me with other people that were in high school was that we were in high school together, but that was about it. So I already knew I was different. John already knew he was different. Like I said, when I met John, he had a double fin mohawk, like Waddy from The Exploited. And he was obviously different. So I think when we chose to do different things and being experimental, we weren't so concerned about what people thought. All we were like, what do we like? So it was a completely 100% indulgence as far as artistically. And we weren't trying to keep up with any of the Joneses or what anyone else was doing. And I think coming from punk rock kind of background, or alternative way of thinking background, it definitely enhanced that. And I think Neurosis definitely were the same thing. I always felt the same way about Neurosis. I loved the first record. When it came out, I was like, this is great. I sensed that about them too. I felt the same way about Nausea too. They were out of the box too. They were a little more traditional punk rock, like analog punk rock. But musically, Nausea are really good. Like if you listen to them musically, Victor's a great guitar player. I think that their music for punk rock brings it to the next level. And I think that's because they did think a little bit out of the box. Like if you were to know Victor, you'd know that he was into early Pink Floyd and King Crimson and all those other groups that thought a little bit different. It's easier, I think, when you're kind of not mainstream thinking to make non-mainstream music.
That was Destiny, Power and Might, and Göden.
That's my aunt's name. Destiny.
Destiny? Aunt Destiny?
What do you think she does for a living?
Oh, shit. It sounds like a madame and like a...
hairdresser.
Oh, okay. I was going to say like she runs like the House of the Rising Sun in New Orleans.
No, nothing quite so.
So Charity, poetic. Destiny, yeah. Really? For real? Destiny?
Oh.
Was it like a difficult like birth or something like that?
Oh, I've never asked her. I just thought it was a dumb name, but...
Well, like my buddy's wife is named Miracle because like there was like
because of
difficulties in pregnancy.
That could be.
Like
I've never really asked her about it because she never seems like she wants to really talk about anything. So
yeah, kind of interesting.
Yeah.
So we're gonna kind of wrap up Into Darkness. We got two big ones coming up: the Eternal Frost, which we of course started the whole show off with, and then the title track Into Darkness, and then we're gonna start to kind of transition into Göden. 30 years later, that's a pretty big gap. Yeah. Probably the biggest gap I think we've ever done between two songs.
I think
maybe
somebody had 27.
Yeah, so 30.
I think that was Dream Death.
But we did have Penance in the middle.
True.
Which I guess we could stick like Thorn and some of the other like weird stuff that Steven's been involved in, but we just chose not to.
Like Carcass had like 17, but they were still doing other shit.
Yeah, exactly.
So
exactly. You had Black Star and a couple other weird things. Black Star was pretty immediate. That was
Bill was an Angel Witch for a while and stuff like that too.
There's also what was Firebird?
Firebird.
Yeah, Firebird. I remember.
Yeah.
We also
with
have
Mike Amat.
Carcass Country. One of the worst, funny,
bad. Jeff Walker's Welcome to Carcass Country.
Yeah, we used to listen to that.
I don't mind it. It's an interesting historical document.
It's got like guys from Amorphous and Entombed, and
I really don't. I haven't listened to it in like 10 years, but
I think the last time we listened to it was like up in. We listened to a bunch around the time that we went up north. Probably the last time we were at the Dunes. That I took you to the Dunes when we were at Liz's.
Okay.
That girl Liz.
I found it at like clearance or something.
Yeah, you were like, "Oh, dude, you got to hear this. This is ridiculous." I wanted to talk briefly before we leave.
It's better than Brujeria, I'll say that.
I like some Brujeria, actually. I've kind of gotten a little bit more into them lately. Not a lot, but like I've kind of learned to appreciate them. You know why? Here's why. Funny story. During the beginning of COVID, I went on a big deep dive into what's that Jason Bateman show about the Ozarks? It's like Breaking Bad.
Ozarks?
Oh, Ozark. Yeah, Jesus Christ. What's that show about the Ozarks? Fuck. It's been a long time since I watched it. It's great. When they take him down to Mexico and they're torturing him, they're playing Brujeria. And I was like, because I was like Shazamming, I was like, what the fuck is this song? I was like, oh, sweet. And then I just kind of went on like not a deep dive, but like a mini dive.
A little exploration.
We've brought this out in a lot of the episodes that we've been doing because most of the bands are featured in this, but this was Mark had a hand in doing the cover, of course. This is the Decibel.
I did the whole cover.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Top 100 doom metal albums of all time, and number 13, Winter.
That's a pretty
Into Darkness.
It's a pretty good spot, man.
Yeah, right in between I Hate God, Take His Knee at Pain, and Typo Negative, Bloody Kisses.
You got two New York bands, side by side, which you don't necessarily think of as a doom centric city at all.
But in a way, like one created like kind of. Not created, but was like a masterpiece of gothic doom, and one's like a masterpiece of death doom. They're like these weird subgenres that they sort of create.
Well, I think the most interesting thing about that like area, I love the fact that they're like these tough guys that like just to get by in the street as kids and not be harassed. You got to have this like tough demeanor, but really you're real sensitive kids, and this is. The art comes out of the sensitive side.
They're surrounded by a lot of art aesthetic, though, too.
Yeah.
You hear that in Swans and Sonic Youth and a lot of those kind of things. But Jonathan Horsley wrote the little write-up on it, and he basically says, Into Darkness is anti-hope, a frigid, cold, and bleak record from a band who were never appreciated in their time, whose sound never quite satisfied the metal scene's hunger for speed and musical physicality. Winter came out of New York in 1988, playing shows in squats on the Lower East Side. They found more traction in the crust and underground hardcore circles than they did in the metal scene. You can hear the Amebix and Discharge influence, but there is also a Celtic Frost flavor in Into Darkness. The late Greg Marchak's austere production adds to its sense of otherness, as the riffs and growls of winter's slow-mo death doom sound as though they're being broadcast from beneath the permafrost. So pretty kind of interesting stuff sort of going on there. And basically what sort of happens, this is from Ron Grimaldi from the recent reissue. He basically says, following the hiatus, Stephen formed Thorn with Roy and John from Nausea, releasing both an EP and an LP on Roadrunner Records. In the interim, however, Winter's reputation slowly developed from near total obscurity to bona fide cult status, well regarded worldwide. They might have been over, but the seeds were sown, and they became a major influence of Cathedral, I Hate God, 13, Grief, and the next wave of slow, heavy, doomy bands that had entered on the metal landscape. And that's going to set up where, after this, we will hear about kind of the reunion and some of that kind of stuff. Stephen will kind of get into all that. But before we leave all Into Darkness behind, we got to kind of talk about these last two tunes. And
yeah, I've got some.
Yeah, go ahead.
I got notes. Oh, for Eternal Frost. Is this the one where I put? It's like you're stumbling across a barren landscape, trying to make sense of the newly like created hell that you're in.
Yeah,
slowly like picking up to a run as far as the pace and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Picking up to run, being stopped again by the horrific scenes. It brings to mind a lot of like Valenfire, Strigoi, some PL-isms. Into like Neurosis, almost right into the Neurosis fucking hellscapes.
Sure.
Samples, like a fleeting radio broadcast. There's like a weird like Kubrickian thing that I'm getting out of this too, like which comes back a lot of like the unsettlingness of a lot of the stuff we've talked about in the last couple of years. Goes back to Kubrick scores. Like
I think of like that humming like ambient thing in 2001 where.
That or like that thing from fucking Eyes Wide Shut.
Yeah.
Which comes back. That movie just comes back and back. It's a what a way to go out.
It's interesting you said, because I said the main Doom riff I said is an antecedent to like My Dying Bride and like early Anathema, Peaceful 3 kind of stuff.
Yeah, I would agree 100%.
I said from the moment of the churning Doom riff at 45 seconds of Eternal Frost, I said it squirms in like Hellhammer played at the wrong speed after flirting with a teasing procreation of the Wicket kind of moments. I said the song gets weird and dissonant and ambient in parts in the middle, which could have been swiped from the Swans for all I know,
sure.
Before one of the most evil hypnotic guitar bend riffs seeps from the abyss of hell. You got lyrics you mentioned before. Forbidden land of sorrow, at last the winter winds sing. Scattered ashes of kings gaze at the fallen walls. Rivers of fear run cold. Ice castle formation. Frozen tears escape eternal frost. Just a cool fucking...
Like I could picture
aesthetic.
This being in like that 1917 movie or something. Like this constant bombardment of
just
assault.
visceral. Yeah. Decibel said about this, I think it was this song, I said, it sounds as if it's falling from 30,000 feet in slow motion. Just fucking heavy, dreary, disgusting, kind of thing. The bass tone of Into Darkness, I said, reminds me of like Motorhead or Sodom or like early Sodom, like sloppy, and even like parts of Voivod, like where it's real sloppy. So the drums really open up the harrowing kind of title track. I said, I've heard it said or read. Oh, this is the album after the events of War Pigs.
Only Autopsy and Winter sounded like Cathedral.
Yes. Oh, there it is. Autopsy and Winter.
Yes.
Yep. You know what got me when I was listening to Into Darkness and I was trying to think of, I kind of kept getting these, like, maybe it's the Stalingrad cover, but I kept getting these impressions of like Russian winters and Siberia and tundras and things like that. And I kind of got connected to the idea that it's almost a perfect soundtrack to like HBO's Chernobyl, which is one of the most bleak fucking shows like I've ever seen. And it really shows you like what that world could have been had we had more atomic fallout, or you get just a little taste of like this is how we could fuck each other up, just like this. I said, in a way, this song lurches. It reminds me like how Serpent's Eve or like Ebony Tears kind of would lurch like
in
a
the
year
darkness?
later. Yeah, just a little bit of that like.
Well, even starting with the super slow double bass.
Yeah,
I put
there's the molasses blast, man.
Yeah, into a cathedral chug. And then where's it? More Kubrick bullshit. I'll put the guitars like hang in the air like smoke.
Okay, yeah.
Because the drums are kind of like more of a propulsive element, and the guitars are just kind of like holding out the notes until, like, it's like you're running with a fucking guitar through this shitty, post-apocalyptic world. Things are going off, and you hit another note, and it's just it's a weird interplay between the drums and the guitar that way.
I think of Neurosis in a sense too, because there's this feeling of relief when that breakdown and scream happens at like the 7-minute mark. You're just like,
I put fuck yeah, chug, roar.
Thank God. Exactly. And then Steven's solo at the end is like this moment of like catharsis. You're just like, phew.
Yeah.
Glad I got through that.
Save the catchiness until the end.
Yeah. Lyrically, it's another uplifting fucking tune. Tolling death bells of the hands of time, numbing minds forced in thought, unheard cries of whimpered breath, penetrating steel, illuminations fade, sacrosanct of another life leaving me, tombs gone rampant, abominate like plagues of negative pointing comparatively confirming unknown, corrupted minds who act for self, logic seeds born as life, pods from the something indescribable, grown reliant, unending quest for hope. I like that. Unending, like it's like a moment, like maybe. Then it goes from unending quest for hope to storms of hooded horsemen through the dying eyes, the ashes blow, torrent winds, unanswered cries, for darkness is near. I mean, it's
good.
That's like black metal type shit, like.
Well, I like that they can do, it's not specific, but it's like emblematic of what they're trying to talk about. Like it puts you in the right state of mind and atmosphere, but it's not literal.
Sure.
With the lyrics. And I think,
it's very poetic. And
he talks a little bit about that, how like they came up with like, here's what we're thinking about for ideas, but the drummer was Joe.
Yeah.
Like
Joe's
could
like
actually
journals and stuff. Yeah.
Could actually take those ideas and make them into the kind of lyrics they wanted. Because lyrics aren't that's a difficult thing. I've tried to do it a couple of times. It's real. The only way I ever was able to do it was to somebody gave me music and I made noises over it and tried to decipher what I thought the noises meant into lyrics. It's not easy to do them well. So that's why you just growl and nobody pays attention, like John Tardy or something.
So then we're going to go from this into Göden, Beyond Darkness, and Komm Süßer Tod, which translates, I believe, I had it. Fuck. I thought I wrote it down somewhere. I'll have to look it up when we come back.
Well, there's actually...
Come Sweet Death. That's what it is. Come Sweet Death.
At some point, they say something that's in like Philosophim.
Oh,
Burzum record. It's
in this song
something Dunkelheit is said in there. I don't know what that means.
Yeah, it's definitely German.
Tod is death.
Yeah,
I know from Indiana Jones, but my 2 years of German didn't really.
Yeah, that's the Come Sweet Death. Yep,
okay.
Yep. So,
but Dunkelheit is said at some point. But
got it.
That means something probably awful as well.
Yep. Something uplifting. And there's a lot to unpack, so we'll play the song at the end, and then we'll kind of come back and really like sort of talk about Beyond Darkness and what is kind of going on with this, who's involved, and all that kind of stuff. But let's sort of wrap up Into Darkness here with the last two tunes. And again, you've already heard Eternal Frost, but this is a different version of it. Compare the two, like them, collect them, figure out which one you like best. And then we've got the title track, the longest tune on the record, Into Darkness, and then we'll come out 30 years later with female vocals and a totally kind of, I wouldn't say new sound, but just update it a bit. It's definitely something with Komm Süßer Tod from the Beyond Darkness from Göden. So enjoy.